Rain lashed the jagged cliffs of northern England like 1,000 knives, slicing through the darkness. St. Agatha's convent loomed in the mist, a Gothic monolith of weathered stone, cut off from the world by dense forests and yawning chasms. Its spires pierced the storm clouds, skeletal fingers reaching for a salvation that seemed to have forsaken this place long ago. Thunder roared, and a bolt of lightning illuminated a lone figure standing motionless behind a tower window. The figure's eyes, hollow and unblinking, stared into the night, as if waiting for something, or someone. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the scent of wax and decay. The convent's corridors, lined with faded icons of weeping saints, stretched into shadows that seemed to ride when no one looked. Deep beneath the chapel, in a crypt older than the stones above, a circle of black candles flickered around a crude altar. Carved into its surface was a serpent devouring its own tail, its eyes glinting with an unnatural sheen in the dim light. The altar was stained, dark, irregular splotches that could have been rust, or something worse. A young nun knelt before it, her face obscured by a hood, her hands trembling as they clutched a dagger. Her habit was tattered, streaked with dirt, as if she'd crawled through the earth to reach this place. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her whispers filled the chamber, not Latin, not prayer, but something older, guttural, a language that seemed to claw at the air. "Through blood, the veil is torn," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the distant howl of the storm. "Through sacrifice, the sister rises." She raised the dagger, its blade catching the candlelight. Her eyes, wide with a mix of terror and reverence, fixed on the altar. Slowly, she turned her palm upward and pressed the blade against her skin. A bead of blood welled, then another, until a thin stream trickled down her wrist. She let it fall, drop by deliberate drop, onto the serpent carving. The blood hissed as it touched the stone, as if the altar itself were alive, thirsty. The candles flared, their flames stretching impossibly high, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the crypt's walls. A low growl rumbled from the darkness beyond the circle, not animal, not human, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The nun's head snapped up, her lips parting in a silent scream. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest, and the shadows thickened, coalescing into a shape that was not a shape, a presence that watched. She staggered to her feet, the dagger clattering to the ground. "It's here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The sacred sister, she comes." The growl deepened, vibrating through the stones. The candles flickered violently, some snuffing out, plunging parts of the crypt into darkness. The nun's hands flew to her face, clawing at her eyes as if to tear away what she saw. Blood seeped between her fingers, not from any wound but from her very paws, staining her habit crimson. She collapsed, her body convulsing, her screams swallowed by the roar of the presence that now filled the chamber. Above, in the convent's chapel, the storm reached its peak. A crucifix rattled against the wall, its nails loosening. A stained glass window depicting the Virgin Mary cracked, a single jagged line splitting her serene face. The nuns sleeping in their cells stirred, some clutching their rosaries, others bolting upright, hearts pounding with a fear they could not name. In the tower, the shadowy figure turned from the window, its silhouette dissolving into the gloom. The crypt fell silent. The candles were out, the altar cold. The nun lay still, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The serpent carving glistened, its surface slick with fresh blood that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Somewhere in the darkness, a whisper lingered, a promise, a prophecy. "The veil is thin," it said. "The sister will rise." The storm outside began to fade, the rain softening to a mournful drizzle. St. Agatha's convent settled back into its oppressive quiet, but the air held a new weight, a sense that something had been awakened, something that would not rest. The tower window stood empty now, but the night felt watched, as if the convent itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next soul to step through its gates. Far below, in the crypt, a single candle flickered back to life. Its flame burned red. Rain lashed the cliffs of northern England, a relentless curtain that blurred the world beyond the rickety bus's windows. Inside, Sister Elizabeth, 25, sat alone, her dark eyes fixed on the storm. Her nun's habit clung damply to her frame, her small suitcase gripped tightly in her lap. Grief shadowed her face, carving lines too deep for her youth. The bus groaned, winding along a road that seemed to lead nowhere, until the driver's gruff voice broke the silence. "St. Agatha's, end of the line." Elizabeth stepped into the deluge, the wind snatching at her veil. Before her loomed St. Agatha's convent, a fortress of ancient stone, its spires stabbing the sky like accusatory fingers. Gargoyles leered from the eaves, their eyes hollow in the lightning's flash. A single light flickered in a tower window, a beacon in the gloom. She trudged to the massive wooden door, its surface etched with weathered saints, their faces worn to ghostly outlines. Her knock echoed, swallowed by the storm. The door creaked open, revealing Mother Superior Agnes, a woman in her 60s with a face like carved granite and eyes that pierced like steel. "You're late, Sister Elizabeth," Agnes said, her voice sharp as the wind. "The Lord does not wait for stragglers." "Forgive me, Mother," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite the chill seeping into her bones. The storm delayed the bus. Agnes's lips thinned. She stepped aside, gesturing into the cavernous foyer. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced across walls adorned with faded icons. Elizabeth's gaze caught on a carving in the stone, a serpent swallowing its tail, its curves unnervingly precise. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold. "Your cell is ready," Agnes said, leading her down a corridor. "Prayers are at dawn. Do not wander." The air was heavy with incense and something earthier, like damp soil after a grave is dug. Elizabeth's suitcase felt like an anchor as they passed doorways shrouded in darkness, the convent silence pressing against her ears. In her cell, a stark chamber with a cot, a crucifix, and a lone candle, Elizabeth set her suitcase down. She pulled out a photograph of her and her sister, Maria, both smiling in better days. Maria's radiant face, framed by her habit, seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Maria," Elizabeth whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened to you?" Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the convent held its own secrets, waiting to be unearthed. 2 years earlier, sunlight had warmed a London park, where Elizabeth, then 23 and dressed in a simple sweater, walked arm in arm with Sister Maria. Maria's habit gleamed, a stark contrast to the vibrant grass and blooming flowers. Her laughter was a melody, her eyes alight with purpose. "Liz, you should see St. Agatha's," Maria said, her voice brimming with conviction. "It's ancient, holy. It's where I'm meant to be." Elizabeth frowned, tugging at her sister's arm. "It's so far, Maria. Isolated. What if something happens? What if you need me?" Maria stopped, her hand gentle on Elizabeth's cheek. "God will protect me, Liz. Always. And you'll find your own path. Elizabeth's throat tightened. Promise you'll write. Promise you'll come back. I promise, Maria said, pulling her into a hug. You're my anchor, you know that. The memory dissolved, and Elizabeth found herself back in her cell, the photograph trembling in her hands. The candle's flame wavered, casting Maria's image in fleeting shadows. Elizabeth traced her sister's smile, the ache in her chest sharpening. Maria had written for a while, letters full of devotion and quiet joy. Then, 6 months ago, the letters stopped. A curt telegram from St. Agatha's had followed, Sister Maria has passed. Cause unknown. Do not come. But Elizabeth had come. She couldn't not come. She tucked the photo under her pillow, her resolve stealing. The convent's silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the walls. She knelt by the cot, clasping her rosary, but the prayers felt hollow. Doubt gnawed at her faith, a whisper that grew louder with every moment in this place. A faint sound, a low, mournful hum, drifted through the walls. Elizabeth froze, her rosary bead slipping through her fingers. The hum wasn't a voice, not quite, but it carried a weight, like a warning. She stood, pressing her ear to the door. The sound stopped, leaving only her racing heartbeat. She glanced at the crucifix above the cot. Its wooden Christ seemed to stare back, its carved eyes unyielding. Elizabeth turned away, her breath uneven. This place was wrong, and she would prove it. Dawn broke, grey and reluctant, as Elizabeth joined the other nuns in St. Agatha's chapel. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax, the stained glass windows dim under the overcast sky. 20 nuns knelt in rows, their habits blending into a sea of black and white, their voices rising in a Latin chant that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The harmony was haunting, almost beautiful, but it carried an undercurrent of strain, as if the words were forced. Elizabeth knelt at the back, her eyes scanning the room. The nuns' faces were pale, their expressions guarded. One, Sister Rose, 30, caught her attention. Rose's hands fidgeted with her rosary, her fingers trembling as she mouthed the prayers. Her eyes, wide and darting, met Elizabeth's for a fleeting moment before snapping away. Mother Agnes stood at the altar, her presence commanding. Her gaze swept over the congregation, lingering on Elizabeth with a scrutiny that felt like a blade. Elizabeth held her stare, refusing to flinch, though her pulse quickened. The chant ended, and the nuns rose in unison, their movements mechanical. Elizabeth lingered as the others filed out, her attention on Rose, who hesitated near a pew, clutching her rosary like a lifeline. Elizabeth approached, her voice low. "Sister Rose," she said, "I'm Elizabeth. Maria's sister." Rose's head jerked up, her face paling. "Maria," she whispered, glancing toward the altar where Agnes was arranging candelabras. You shouldn't be here. I need to know what happened to her," Elizabeth pressed, stepping closer. "Please." Rose's eyes flicked to Agnes again, her breath hitching. "Not here," she hissed. "The garden. Tonight. After campaign." Before Elizabeth could respond, Rose hurried away, her footsteps echoing in the empty chapel. Elizabeth turned to leave, but a shadow moved in the corner of her vision, a flicker near the altar, too quick to be sure. She squinted, but the chapel was still, save for Agnes, who now watched her openly, her expression unreadable. Elizabeth's hand tightened around her rosary. The chapel's icon seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes accusing. She forced herself to walk out, the weight of unseen gazes pressing against her back. Night cloaked the convent, the storm reduced to a mournful drizzle. Elizabeth slipped through the cloister, her habit brushing against damp stone. The garden was a tangle of overgrown roses and ivy, its paths winding into shadows. Mist curled around her ankles, and the air smelled of wet earth and decay. She found Sister Rose near a crumbling statue of Saint Agatha, her face ghostly in the moonlight. Rose clutched a small leather-bound journal, her hands shaking. "You came," Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maria, she trusted me. She found something. Something evil." Elizabeth's heart pounded. What did she find? Rose thrust the journal into Elizabeth's hands. She wrote it all down. The Order of the Veil. The Sacred Sister. It's all in there. Elizabeth opened the journal, its pages brittle and stained. Sketches of the serpent symbol filled the margins, alongside Maria's neat handwriting. Words like rituals and crypt jumped out, underlined with urgency. "What's the Sacred Sister?" Elizabeth asked, her voice low. "I don't know," Rose said, her eyes darting to the shadows. Maria was scared. She said the convent isn't what it seems. A twig snapped in the distance. Rose gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A shadow shifted among the trees, too tall to be a nun, too silent to be natural. Elizabeth grabbed Rose's arm, but Rose yanked free, her face contorted with panic. "Go!" Rose hissed, shoving Elizabeth toward the cloister. "They can't know you have it." Rose fled into the mist, her footsteps fading. Elizabeth clutched the journal to her chest, her breath shallow. The shadow lingered, motionless, then melted into the darkness. She backed away, her pulse roaring in her ears, and hurried back to her cell, the journal a burning weight in her hands. In her cell, Elizabeth sat cross-legged on the cot, Maria's journal open under the candle's flickering light. The pages were a map of her sister's fear, notes about strange chants in the crypt, nuns vanishing without explanation, and a charismatic priest named Father Gabriel who arrived a year ago. One entry, dated a month before Maria's death, sent a chill down Elizabeth's spine. Father Gabriel speaks of salvation, but his eyes burn with something unholy, Maria had written. "I saw him in the crypt, chanting words that weren't Latin. The sisters followed him like lambs to slaughter. I'm afraid, Liz. I think they are watching me." Elizabeth's fingers trembled as she turned the page. A sketch of the serpent symbol stared back, its lines stark against the paper. Below it, Maria had scrawled, "The Sacred Sister will rise." What does it mean? A low growl echoed outside her door, not thunder, not wind, a sound that seemed to crawl from the earth. Elizabeth blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. Her breath caught as the growl faded, replaced by a faint scratching, like nails on stone. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the journal, her mind racing. Was Maria delusional, or had she uncovered something real? The convent silence felt alive, watching, waiting. Elizabeth's faith, once a comfort, now felt like a fragile shield against the darkness creeping closer. The scratching stopped. She relit the candle, her hands unsteady. The journal lay open, Maria's words a plea from beyond the grave. Elizabeth's resolve hardened. She would read every page, follow every clue. Whatever took Maria was still here, and she would face it. Outside, the tower light flickered, as if signaling to something in the night. The convent's library was a labyrinth of shadows, its air thick with a musty scent of ancient books and wax. Elizabeth slipped inside after midday prayers, Maria's journal tucked beneath her habit. The room was vast, its shelves towering to a vaulted ceiling where cobwebs draped like mourning veils. A single lantern swayed from a chain, casting a feeble glow that barely reached the corners. Elizabeth's footsteps echoed as she moved deeper, her fingers trailing along spines embossed with Latin titles. She wasn't sure what she sought, answers to Maria's cryptic notes, perhaps, or proof that her sister's fears weren't madness. The journal mentioned the Order of the Veil, a phrase that gnawed at her, and she hoped the library held some clue. In a secluded alcove, she found a shelf hidden behind a tattered curtain. The books here were older, their leather covers cracked and stained. One caught her eye, a slim volume with no title, its binding marked with a serpent symbol. Her pulse quickened as she eased it from the shelf, dust swirling in the lantern's light. The pages were brittle, filled with dense script and illustrations that made her stomach churn, rituals involving blood, chants to entities with unpronounceable names, and a prophecy about a sacred sister, destined to tear the veil and birth the dark. Elizabeth's breath hitched as she read a passage, "She of the chosen blood shall offer herself, and through her, the serpents shall rise." A creak broke her focus. She snapped the book shut, heart pounding. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. She shoved the book back onto the shelf and ducked behind a bookcase just as a figure entered the alcove, Mother Agnes, her face stern in the dim light. Agnes's eyes scanned the shelves, lingering on the spot where the book had been. She muttered something under her breath, too low to hear, then turned and left. Elizabeth exhaled, her hands trembling. The library felt smaller now, its shadows pressing closer. She slipped Maria's journal from her habit, its weight a reminder of her purpose. Whatever the sacred sister was, Maria had died trying to stop it. Elizabeth vowed to finish what her sister started, no matter the cost. The convent's dining hall was a stark contrast to the library, its long wooden table lined with nuns eating in near silence. Elizabeth sat at the end, her bowl of thin soup untouched, her mind still reeling from the library's revelations. The serpent symbol, the prophecy, it all pointed to something darker than she'd imagined. A hush fell over the room as Father Gabriel, 40, handsome, magnetic, entered. His black cassock was impeccably tailored, his smile warm but calculated. The nuns straightened, some blushing, others averting their eyes. Elizabeth watched, noting the shift in the air, like a storm gathering. Gabriel moved to the head of the table, his voice smooth as velvet. "Sisters, let us give thanks for this humble meal and for the Lord's guidance in these trying times." The nuns murmured their amens, but Elizabeth's gaze stayed on Gabriel. Maria's journal had painted him as a threat, a man whose charm masked something sinister. As he spoke, his eyes found hers, holding her stare with an intensity that made her skin prickle. After the meal, Gabriel approached her, his presence commanding. "Sister Elizabeth," he said, his voice low, "you new to St. Agatha's. How are you finding our sanctuary?" "It's different," Elizabeth said, choosing her words carefully. "Quiet." Gabriel's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Quiet, yes. A place for reflection, Your sister, Maria, found solace here, did she not? Elizabeth tensed at Maria's name. She did. Until she didn't. His expression flickered, a shadow crossing his face. A tragedy, he said softly. But God's will is mysterious. Be careful, sister. Curiosity can lead to dangerous places. He turned away, leaving her with a chill that lingered long after he'd gone. The other nuns avoided her gaze, their silence heavier than before. Elizabeth clutched Maria's journal beneath the table, its pages a lifeline. Gabriel knew something, and she would find out what. That night, Elizabeth lay awake in her cell, the convent silence pressing against her like a physical weight. The candle on her bedside had burned low, its flame a fragile defense against the darkness. Maria's journal rested on her chest, its words seared into her mind. She couldn't shake the image of the serpent, its endless loop a promise of something eternal and terrible. A sound broke the stillness, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on glass. Elizabeth sat up, her breath catching. The tapping came from the window, though her cell was on the second floor, far above the ground. She approached cautiously, the floorboards creaking under her bare feet. The window was fogged, the storm's remnant streaking its panes. The tapping stopped as she neared, but a shape flickered outside, a shadow, humanoid but distorted, its edges bleeding into the night. Elizabeth's hand hovered over the latch, fear warring with curiosity. She leaned closer, her breath clouding the glass. Words appeared, scratched into the frost from the outside, "She sees you." Elizabeth stumbled back, her heart hammering. The shadow vanished, but the words remained, stark against the glass. She grabbed the journal, flipping to a page where Maria had written, "They watch from the dark. They know I'm close." The similarity was too stark to ignore. A low moan echoed through the walls, not human, not animal, a sound that seemed to rise from the convent's foundations. The candle flickered violently, then snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. Elizabeth fumbled for matches, her hands shaking as she relit the wick. The light returned, but the air felt heavier, as if something lingered just beyond her sight. She knelt by the cot, praying for strength, but the words felt empty. The convent wasn't a sanctuary, it was a cage, and something was stalking her within it. She clutched the journal, its pages her only guide. Whatever had haunted Maria was now turning its gaze on her. The next evening, after the Compline prayers, Elizabeth returned to the garden, her nerves frayed but her determination unshaken. The moon was hidden, the air damp with the scent of rotting leaves. She found Sister Rose by the same statue, her face gaunt, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. "You shouldn't have come," Rose whispered, her voice barely audible. "They are watching." "Who's watching?" Elizabeth asked, stepping closer. "Rose, please. I need to know what Maria found." Rose's hands twisted her rosary, the beads clicking like bones. "The order," she said, her voice breaking. "They are not just nuns. They serve something else." Maria saw it in the crypt. She was going to tell someone, but they got to her first. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. The crypt. What's down there? Rose shook her head, tears welling. "I can't. If they find out I talked," she froze, her gaze fixed on something behind Elizabeth. A rustle came from the trees, followed by a low, guttural hum, like the chant from Elizabeth's nightmare. Rose shoved a folded note into Elizabeth's hand. "Read it later. Go, now." Elizabeth hesitated, but Rose pushed her toward the cloister, her eyes wide with terror. "Run!" Elizabeth sprinted back, the note burning in her palm. She glanced back once, but Rose was gone, swallowed by the mist. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground, then faded as she reached the safety of the cloister. Her chest heaved as she leaned against a wall, the note crumpled in her fist. She unfolded it, her hands trembling. In Rose's shaky scrawl were 3 words, "Crypt. Midnight. Beware." Back in her cell, Elizabeth paced, the note and journal spread before her. The convent's secrets were unraveling, each thread pulling her deeper into danger. Maria had seen something in the crypt, something that cost her life. Now Rose was risking everything to point Elizabeth toward the truth, but the warning, "Beware," echoed in her mind. She opened the journal again, searching for mentions of the crypt. Maria's entries grew frantic toward the end, describing late-night rituals, nuns slipping into the undercroft, and Father Gabriel's presence at the heart of it all. One passage stood out: "The crypt isn't a tomb. It's a gateway. They're calling something through." Elizabeth's thoughts churned. The serpent symbol, the prophecy, the order of the veil, it all converged on the crypt. She couldn't wait for Rose's help, she had to see it herself. But Gabriel's warning and Agnes's scrutiny loomed large. They knew she was asking questions, and the shadow at her window proved she wasn't alone. A knock at her door made her jump. She hid the journal and note, her heart racing. The door opened before she could respond, revealing a young nun, Sister Clara, barely 20, her face pale. "Mother Agnes wants you," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Now." Elizabeth followed, the convent's corridors seeming narrower, the icon's eyes more accusing. Clara avoided her gaze, her hands twisting nervously. As they passed the chapel, a faint chant drifted from within, not the familiar Latin but something older, dissonant. Elizabeth's skin prickled, but Clara hurried her along. In Agnes's office, the Mother Superior sat behind a heavy desk, a crucifix looming above her. Her eyes bored into Elizabeth, cold and unyielding. "You've been asking about your sister," Agnes said, her voice like ice. "Some truths are better left buried, Sister Elizabeth. For your own sake." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "Maria deserves justice. I won't stop." Agnes's smile was thin, dangerous. "Then tread carefully. The Lord watches, but so do others." Dismissed, Elizabeth left, her resolve burning brighter. Midnight was hours away, but the crypt called to her, a siren song of truth and terror. She would go, no matter what watched from the dark. The convent slept under a moonless sky, its silence broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through stone corridors. Elizabeth stood in her cell, the candle long extinguished, Maria's journal and Rose's note clutched in her hands. The note's words, "Crypt. Midnight. Beware," burned in her mind, a summons she couldn't ignore. The clock in the cloister had chimed 11, and the hour of decision loomed. Mother Agnes's warning, Father Gabriel's veiled threat, and the shadow at her window all screamed for caution, but Maria's voice, preserved in the journal's pages, drowned them out. "The crypt is a gateway," Maria had written. "They're calling something through." Elizabeth slipped into the corridor, her habit blending with the shadows. The convent felt alive, its walls whispering secrets as she crept past closed doors. The air grew colder, heavier, as she descended a spiral staircase to the undercroft, guided by Maria's sketches of the crypt's entrance, the hidden door behind the chapel's altar. Her heart thudded, each step a defiance of Agnes's command to stay away. The chapel was empty, its stained glass windows black in the night. Elizabeth moved to the altar, her fingers tracing the stone until she found a seam, barely visible. She pressed, and a low groan reverberated as a panel slid open, revealing a narrow staircase plunging into darkness. The air that wafted up smelled of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. She hesitated, Rose's warning echoing in her ears, but the journal's weight in her pocket urged her forward. The crypt was a cavern of shadows, its ceiling lost in gloom. Iron sconces held unlit torches, and the floor was slick with moisture. At the center stood a crude altar, its surface carved with the serpent swallowing its tail, just as Maria had drawn. Elizabeth's breath caught as she approached, her fingers brushing the stone. It was cold, stained with dark patches that glistened faintly in the dim light she cast with a match. Maria's journal described rituals here, chants, blood, and a presence that wasn't God. Elizabeth scanned the crypt, her match flickering. The walls were etched with symbols, not Christian but older, their lines twisting like veins. A faint hum began, low and resonant, vibrating through the stone. Her match went out, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for another, her hands shaking, but the hum grew louder, joined by a whisper, not words, but a chorus of voices, overlapping, pleading, accusing. The air thickened, pressing against her chest. She struck the match, and the flame revealed a figure at the altar's edge, a woman in a tattered habit, her face obscured, her hands dripping with something dark. Elizabeth gasped, stumbling back. The figure turned, its eyes hollow sockets, and whispered, "Elizabeth." The match died. The whispers became a scream, not from the figure but from the crypt itself. Elizabeth ran, her footsteps echoing as she fled up the stairs, the journal slipping from her pocket. She didn't stop to retrieve it, driven by primal fear. The chapel's altar slammed shut behind her, and she collapsed against the pew, her breath ragged. The scream faded, but the convent's silence was no longer empty, it watched her, waited. Dawn crept into St. Agatha's, grey and heavy, as Elizabeth sat in the chapel, her hands clasped tightly to still their trembling. The crypt's horrors clung to her like damp cloth, the altar, the figure, the scream that wasn't human. She'd lost Maria's journal in her flight, a devastating blow, but its words were seared into her memory. The Order of the Veil, the Sacred Sister, the crypt's gateway, they were real, and Maria had died to expose them. She hadn't seen Rose since the garden, and fear for her gnawed at Elizabeth's gut. Had Rose gone to the crypt and met that thing? Or had the Order silenced her? Elizabeth's encounter with Agnes replayed in her mind, the Mother Superior's warning now a clear threat. Father Gabriel's charm masked a predator, and the convent's nuns were either complicit or too afraid to act. Elizabeth was alone, but she wasn't helpless. She rose, her resolve hardening. The chapel's icons stared down, their painted faces no longer comforting but judgmental, as if they knew her fate was fraying. She knelt before the crucifix, not to pray but to think. Maria had been fearless, digging into the convent's darkness until it consumed her. Elizabeth couldn't turn back now, not after what she'd seen. The crypt was the key, and she would return, journal or not. A soft creak broke her thoughts. Sister Clara, the young nun who'd summoned her to Agnes, stood in the chapel doorway, her face pale. "Sister Elizabeth," Clara whispered, glancing over her shoulder, "you dropped this." Clara held out Maria's journal, its leather cover scuffed but intact. Elizabeth's heart leapt as she took it, her fingers brushing Clara's trembling ones. "Where did you find it?" "In the cloister," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "Near the chapel stairs." I saw you last night." "You shouldn't go down there." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "What do you know, Clara?" Clara shook her head, tears welling. "Nothing. Just, be careful. They are always watching." She fled before Elizabeth could press further, her footsteps fading into the convent's maze. Elizabeth opened the journal, its pages undamaged. A new note, not in Maria's hand, was tucked inside, written in the same shaky scrawl as Rose's earlier message, "They know you went. Stay away from the crypt. Find Thomas." The name, Thomas, was unfamiliar, but it was a lifeline, a clue. Rose was alive, or had been when she wrote this, and someone named Thomas might hold answers. The chapel's silence grew oppressive, the air heavy with unseen eyes. Elizabeth tucked the journal and note into her habit, her mind racing. The crypt had shown her the truth, however terrifying, and she couldn't unsee it. The Order of the Veil was real, and its rituals were no mere superstition. Maria had been their victim, and Elizabeth was their next target. She stood, her gaze fixed on the crucifix. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "For Maria, I'll tear this place apart." Outside, the tower light flickered, a beacon in the gathering mist. The convent held its breath, waiting for Elizabeth's next move. She would find Thomas, confront the crypt again, and expose the darkness that had taken her sister. The path ahead was perilous, but she was no longer just a nun, she was a hunter, and St. Agatha's was her prey. The air in St. Agatha's convent was colder now, as if the crypt's darkness had seeped into the stones above. Elizabeth crouched in her cell, the door barred with a chair, Maria's journal open on the cot. The note from Sister Rose, "They know you went. Stay away from the crypt. Find Thomas," lay beside it, its words a warning and a beacon. Midnight had come and gone, but sleep was impossible. The memory of the crypt's altar, the hollow-eyed figure, and the scream that wasn't human haunted her. Yet Rose's note implied someone else was fighting this battle, someone named Thomas, and Elizabeth clung to that hope like a lifeline. She couldn't stay away from the crypt, not after what she'd seen. Maria's journal described rituals there, blood offerings to summon something called the Sacred Sister. Elizabeth's encounter had confirmed it wasn't myth, the convent was a nest of evil, and the crypt was its heart. She had to go back, not just for answers but to find proof, something to expose Mother Agnes and Father Gabriel. The journal mentioned a hidden chamber beyond the altar, a place Maria had never reached. That was her goal now. Elizabeth slipped into the corridor, the convent silence heavier than ever. The chapel was her destination, its secret staircase the only path to the crypt. She moved like a shadow, her habit blending with the gloom, her rosary bead silent in her pocket. The icons on the walls seemed to watch, their painted eyes glinting with malice. A faint hum, like the one from the crypt, pulsed through the floor, faint but unmistakable. Her skin prickled, but she pressed on, driven by Maria's memory. The chapel was a cavern of darkness, the altar looming like a judge. Elizabeth found the hidden panel. It seemed barely visible. She pressed, and the stone groaned, revealing the staircase. The air from below was thick, metallic, and alive with whispers, not voices, but a chorus of dread. She lit a stolen candle, its flame trembling as she descended. The crypt was unchanged, damp, cavernous, the serpent-carved altar at its center. But now, the shadows seemed to move, curling at the edges of her vision. Elizabeth approached the altar, a candle casting light on the stained stone. She searched for the hidden chamber Maria had mentioned, her fingers probing the carvings. A click sounded, and a section of the wall behind the altar slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel. She stepped inside, the passage claustrophobic, its walls slick with moisture. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, its floor inlaid with a mosaic of the serpent symbol, its walls lined with niches holding clay urns. At the far end stood a second altar, smaller but more ornate, draped in black cloth. On it lay a dagger, its blade etched with runes, and a chalice filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Elizabeth's stomach churned. This was no place of God. She reached for the chalice, but a sudden gust snuffed her candle. The hum became a growl, and the shadows thickened, forming a shape that wasn't human. She backed away, her breath shallow, as the shape whispered her name, Elizabeth, in a voice that echoed Maria's. She turned to flee, but the tunnel's entrance slammed shut, trapping her. The growl deepened, and the air grew suffocating. Elizabeth's faith faltered, but her resolve didn't. She clutched the journal, a talisman against the dark, and vowed to survive, for Maria, for the truth. Panic clawed at Elizabeth as she pounded on the sealed tunnel entrance, the crypt's growl reverberating around her. The shadow loomed closer, its form shifting, now a woman, now something else, its eyes burning holes in the darkness. She fumbled for the dagger on the altar, her hands shaking, and held it aloft, not to fight but to ward off the presence. The growl paused, and the shadow retreated, as if the blade carried some power. A grinding sound followed, and the tunnel door cracked open, just enough for her to slip through. Elizabeth ran, the crypt's whispers chasing her up the stairs. She burst into the chapel, slamming the altar panel shut, her chest heaving. The dagger was still in her hand, its runes glinting in the moonlight filtering through the stained glass. She tucked it into her habit, alongside the journal, and fled the chapel, her only thought to escape the convent's suffocating walls. The garden was her refuge, its misty paths a maze where she could hide. But as she stumbled through the roses, a figure emerged from the trees, a man, not a nun, his silhouette tall and rugged against the fog. Elizabeth froze, the dagger half-drawn, her heart racing. He stepped closer, his face coming into view, Brother Thomas, 30, weathered, eyes sharp with purpose, dressed in a groundskeeper's coat, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Don't scream," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I'm Thomas. Rose sent me." Elizabeth's grip on the dagger tightened. "Rose? Where is she? Who are you?" Thomas glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting pursuit. "Rose is hiding. She's scared, but safe, for now. I'm not one of them. I came to St. Agatha's to find my brother, Michael. He was a seminarian here, training under Gabriel. He disappeared a year ago." Elizabeth's mind raced, connecting Rose's note to this stranger. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you're holding a ritual dagger from the crypt," Thomas said, nodding at her hand. and you're still alive. That means you're either brave or stupid. Either way, you're not with the Order." She lowered the dagger, but not her guard. "The Order of the Veil. Maria wrote about them. They killed her, didn't they?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Likely. Michael sent me a letter before he vanished, warning about Gabriel and rituals in the crypt. I've been watching the convent since, trying to get proof. Rose was helping me, until she got too scared." A rustle came from the woods, and Thomas grabbed Elizabeth's arm, pulling her behind a statue. Footsteps approached, two nuns in black habits, their faces pale, their eyes unnaturally blank. They moved with eerie precision, scanning the garden. Elizabeth held her breath, Thomas's hand steady on her shoulder. The nuns passed, their footsteps fading. Thomas released her, his expression grim. "They're patrolling more now. They know someone's digging. We need to talk, but not here. My shed, outside the walls, tomorrow night." Elizabeth nodded, her fear tempered by a spark of hope. Thomas was a risk, but he was also a lead, the first real ally since Rose. "What's in the crypt?" she asked. "What are they summoning?" Thomas's eyes darkened. "Something old. Something that shouldn't be here. Find me tomorrow, and I'll show you what I've got." He slipped into the mist, leaving Elizabeth alone with the dagger, the journal, and a name, Thomas, that carried the weight of her next step. The convent's tower light flickered, a silent sentinel, as she returned to her cell, the night alive with threats and possibilities. The next night, Elizabeth moved through St. Agatha's convent like a ghost, her heart pounding with every creak of the ancient floorboards. The ritual dagger, its runes cold against her skin, was hidden beneath her habit alongside Maria's journal. The convent's corridors felt narrower, the air thick with a presence that seemed to watch her every step. Mother Agnes's warning and Father Gabriel's piercing gaze haunted her, but Thomas's promise of answers drove her forward. She had to reach his shed, outside the convent walls, where he claimed to have evidence of the Order of the Veil's crimes. She slipped out through a side door near the kitchen, the night air sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth. The forest beyond the convent was a tangle of gnarled trees, their branches clawing at the starless sky. Elizabeth followed Thomas's instructions, a hidden path marked by a broken stone cross, her footsteps muffled by the damp ground. The tower's flickering light cast long shadows, as if the convent itself were reaching for her. The shed was a ramshackle structure, half swallowed by ivy, its windows boarded. Elizabeth knocked softly, her breath visible in the chill. The door opened a crack, revealing Thomas's rugged face, his eyes scanning the darkness before pulling her inside. The shed was cramped, lit by a single oil lamp. Maps, photographs, and scribbled notes covered the walls, a chaotic tapestry of obsession. A small table held a battered Bible, a knife, and a stack of letters tied with twine. "You made it," Thomas said, his voice low but warm. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I don't have a choice," Elizabeth replied, her gaze sweeping the room. "Maria's dead because of them." "What do you know?" Thomas gestured to the wall, where a map of the convent was pinned, red lines marking tunnels beneath the crypt. "My brother, Michael, was studying to be a priest. He came here to train under Gabriel, but he started asking questions about the Order, the rituals. His last letter said he'd found something in the crypt, something they'd killed to protect." He handed her a crumpled letter, Michael's handwriting tight with fear. the veil isn't a metaphor. They're summoning something. If I don't make it, find the groundskeeper's shed. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. That's why you're here. You're not just a groundskeeper. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. I've been watching for months, sneaking into the convent when I can. Rose helped me, passing notes, but she's too scared to keep going. You're different. You went into the crypt and came out alive. She pulled a dagger from her habit, its blade glinting in the lamplight. I found this in a hidden chamber. It stopped whatever was down there. Thomas's eyes widened. That's no ordinary blade. Michael mentioned weapons blessed by the Order, used in their rituals. Keep it close. He showed her a photograph, a grainy image of Father Gabriel in the crypt, standing over an altar with black candles, surrounded by nuns in dark veils. This is what we're up against, Thomas said. They are not just a cult. They're waking something ancient. A sudden thud rattled the shed's door. Elizabeth froze, clutching the dagger. Thomas doused the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Outside, footsteps crunched, slow and deliberate. A low hum, like the one from the crypt, seeped through the walls. Thomas pressed a finger to his lips, guiding her to a corner behind a stack of crates. The door creaked, and a shadow loomed in the doorway, a nun, her face obscured, her eyes glinting unnaturally in the faint moonlight. The nun lingered, then retreated, the hum fading. Elizabeth exhaled, her body trembling. Thomas relit the lamp, his face grim. They're closing in. We need to move fast. Back in her cell, Elizabeth sat on the cot, the dagger and journal beside her, Thomas's photograph burning in her memory. The image of Father Gabriel in the crypt confirmed Maria's fears. The Order of the Veil was real, and its rituals were no mere superstition. Thomas's shed had given her a glimpse of the truth, but it also made the convent feel more like a trap. The nun at the shed door wasn't human, not entirely. Her eyes had held the same hollow hunger as the figure in the crypt. Elizabeth's faith, already frayed, teetered on the edge of collapse, but her resolve to avenge Maria grew stronger. She opened a journal, searching for clues about the hidden chamber and the dagger. Maria's final entries were frantic, describing a ritual she'd witnessed. They bled a nun, not to kill but to feed the altar. Gabriel chanted, and the air changed, like something was breathing with us. The sacred sister isn't a person. It's a vessel. Elizabeth's stomach twisted. Was Maria killed to feed this vessel? Or was she meant to be it? A faint scratching began at her window, slow and deliberate, like nails carving stone. Elizabeth's heart leapt, but she forced herself to stay calm. She approached, the dagger in hand, and peered through the glass. The window was fogged, but words were forming, etched from the outside, "You cannot hide." She stumbled back, the dagger raised. The scratching became a growl, low and guttural, vibrating through the walls. The candle on her bedside flickered, its flame bending as if blown by an unseen breath. The growl formed words, not in her ears but in her mind. "Elizabeth, join us, the sister calls." The voice was layered, a chorus of anguish and malice, and it carried a pull, like a current dragging her toward the abyss. Her knees buckled, and she clutched the crucifix above her cot, praying for strength. The dagger grew warm in her hand, its runes glowing faintly, and the growl receded, the voice fading into a hiss. The candle steadied, but the words on the window remained, a stark reminder of the convent's reach. Elizabeth sank to the floor, her breath ragged. The demon, or whatever it was, knew her name, her purpose. She thought of Thomas, his maps and letters, his determination to find Michael. He was her only ally now, but the convent was tightening its grip. She had to act before it was too late. She tucked the dagger and journal into her habit, her mind racing. Thomas had mentioned tunnels beneath the crypt, places even Maria hadn't explored. If the Order was summoning something, the evidence would be there. She would meet Thomas again, but first, she needed to find Rose. If Rose was still alive, she might know more about the sacred sister, and why the demon wanted Elizabeth. A distant scream pierced the night, sharp and human, cut off abruptly. Elizabeth froze, her blood running cold. It came from the convent's west wing, where the nuns' cells were. She gripped the dagger, her decision made. She would check the west wing, then find Thomas. The convent's secrets were unraveling, and she would tear them open, even if it meant facing the demon itself. The scream still echoed in Elizabeth's ears, a raw, human cry that had shattered the convent's oppressive silence. She stood in her cell, the ritual dagger's weight grounding her against the panic clawing at her chest. The words etched on her window, "You cannot hide," glared in the candlelight, torn from the demon that had whispered her name. The scream had come from the west wing, where the nuns' cells lined a labyrinth of stone corridors. It could be Rose, or another victim of the Order of the Veil. Elizabeth couldn't wait, she had to act. She slipped the dagger and Maria's journal into her habit, their presence a reminder of her mission. The note from Rose, urging her to find Thomas, was tucked alongside, but the scream demanded her attention first. If Rose was in danger, Elizabeth might still save her. She unbarred her door and stepped into the corridor, the convent shadows stretching like fingers eager to grasp her. The west wing was a maze of narrow passages, the air thick with the scent of wax and mildew. Elizabeth moved silently, her footsteps muffled by years of dust. The icons on the wall seemed to leer, their painted scents twisting into mocking grins in the flickering light of wall sconces. She passed closed doors, each one a potential trap, her hand hovering over the dagger's hilt. A faint whimper guided her to a corner cell, its door ajar. Elizabeth peered inside, her breath catching. The room was a mirror of her own, cot, crucifix, candle, but chaos reigned. The cot was overturned, its mattress slashed, and the crucifix hung upside down, its wooden Christ defiled with streaks of dark liquid. On the floor lay a rosary, its beads scattered like spilled blood. Elizabeth knelt, her fingers brushing the beads. They were roses, she recognized the chipped cross from their garden meeting. Her heart sank. Had Rose been taken, or had she fled? A smear of the same dark liquid trailed from the rosary to the wall, where a crude serpent symbol was scrawled, its lines wet and glistening. The sight sent a chill through her, echoing the altar in the crypt. A low moan came from behind the cot. Elizabeth gripped the dagger and moved closer, her pulse roaring. Huddled in the shadows was Sister Clara, the young nun who'd returned Maria's journal. Clara's face was ashen, her habit torn, her eyes wide with terror. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, and her hands clutched a crumpled piece of paper. "Clara," Elizabeth whispered, kneeling beside her. "What happened? Where's Rose?" Clara's lips trembled. They took her to the crypt. I tried to stop them, but," she choked back a sob, thrusting the paper into Elizabeth's hands. "Rose left this for you." Elizabeth unfolded it, her hands unsteady. In Rose's handwriting, it read, "The sacred sister is a lie. They want you, Elizabeth. Run." The words hit like a blow. The order wasn't just after Rose, they were targeting her, just as Maria had feared. Clara's voice broke through her shock. "They saw me," Clara whispered. "They'll come for me next. You have to go." "Fine, Thomas." Elizabeth helped Clara to her feet, her mind racing. The West Wing was no longer safe, and the crypt was a death trap. But Rose's note and Clara's fear confirmed the order's reach. She had to find Thomas, now more than ever. "Come with me," she said, but Clara shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I can't," Clara said. "They'll know. Go, before it's too late." Reluctantly, Elizabeth left, the note burning in her pocket. The West Wing's silence felt predatory, as if the convent itself were biding its time. She had to reach Thomas's shed, but the scream, Rose's absence, and a demon's whisper weighed on her. The order was closing in, and she was running out of time. The forest outside St. Agatha's was a realm of mist and menace, its trees twisting into shapes that seemed to watch Elizabeth as she fled the convent. The night was colder, the air sharp with the promise of frost. She clutched the dagger, its runes a faint comfort, and Maria's journal, now joined by Rose's final note, "They want you, Elizabeth. Run." But running wasn't an option, not when Rose was in the crypt, not when Maria's killer still roamed these halls. Thomas was her only hope, his shed a beacon in the darkness. She found the path by the broken stone cross, her breath visible as she hurried through the woods. The tower's light flickered behind her, a constant reminder of the convent's gaze. Every rustle in the underbrush made her flinch, the memory of the nun's hollow eyes at the shed door vivid. The order knew she was moving, and the demon's whisper, "Join us," lingered in her mind, a siren call she fought to ignore. The shed appeared through the fog, its boarded windows dark. Elizabeth knocked, her heart pounding. Thomas opened the door, his face etched with worry. "You're late," he said, pulling her inside. The lamp cast a warm glow over his chaotic workspace, maps, letters, and a photograph of Father Gabriel in the crypt. He noticed her tension immediately. "What happened?" "Rose is gone," Elizabeth said, her voice tight. "They took her to the crypt. Clara found this." She handed him Rose's note, watching his expression harden as he read it. "They are targeting you," Thomas said, his voice low. "Just like they targeted Michael and Maria." Elizabeth pulled out the journal, flipping to a page about the crypt's tunnels. Maria wrote about passages beneath the crypt, places the order used for their rituals. "If Rose is there, we can find her, and proof of what they are doing." Thomas nodded, pointing to his map. "I've mapped some of the tunnels, based on Michael's notes. They lead to chambers the nuns don't even know about. But they are dangerous, collapsing in places, and," he hesitated, his eyes dark. "Something's down there." Michael said it wasn't human. Elizabeth's hand tightened on the dagger. "I've heard it. Seen it. It knows my name." Thomas's gaze softened, a flicker of empathy breaking through his resolve. "Then we go together. But we need a plan. The order patrols the crypt at night, and Gabriel's always close. We'll need a diversion. He showed her a sketch of the tunnels, marking an entrance near the convent's old well, hidden by overgrown vines. We can get in here, avoid the chapel. But once we're inside, there's no turning back. A distant howl cut through the night, not a wolf, but something older, hungrier. Thomas doused the lamp, and they crouched in darkness, listening as the sound circled the shed, then faded. They are hunting, he whispered. We move tomorrow night. Rest here until dawn, it's safer. Elizabeth nodded, her body exhausted but her mind alight. The tunnels were her next step, descent into the heart of the Order's evil. Rose might still be alive, and the truth about Maria, and the sacred sister, waited below. Thomas's presence, steady and determined, was a lifeline she hadn't expected. As the night pressed in, she felt the first stirrings of trust, a fragile bond forged in shared loss and defiance. The shed's darkness enveloped Elizabeth as she sat on a crate, the oil lamp's glow extinguished to avoid detection. The howl from the forest had faded, but its echo lingered in her mind, a reminder of the convent's unnatural hunters. Thomas crouched nearby, his silhouette tense, his knife glinting in the faint moonlight seeping through the boarded windows. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and fear, but Thomas's presence, steady, resolute, offered a flicker of solace in the chaos. Elizabeth clutched Maria's journal, its pages worn from her relentless study. Rose's note, warning that the Order wanted her, was tucked inside, alongside the ritual dagger, its runes a silent promise of protection. Thomas's plan to enter the crypt's tunnels tomorrow night loomed large, but the weight of the day, Clara's terror, Rose's abduction, the demon's whisper, pressed against her. She needed to trust Thomas, but trust was a luxury she could barely afford. "You're quiet," Thomas said, his voice soft but piercing the silence. Second thoughts. Elizabeth shook her head, her fingers tightening around the journal. "No. I'm just tired. Maria's gone, Rose is probably next, and I'm supposed to believe we can stop this." Thomas moved closer, sitting beside her. His warmth was a stark contrast to the shed's chill. "You're not alone in this, Elizabeth. I lost Michael to them. I know what it's like to carry that weight." She met his gaze, his eyes reflecting a pain that mirrored her own. "How do you keep going, knowing they took him?" "I don't," Thomas admitted, his voice rough. "Some days, I want to burn this place down and walk away. But Michael's letter, he begged me to stop them. I owe him that. And now, seeing you," he paused, his jaw tightening. "You're stronger than you know." Elizabeth's throat tightened. His words stirred something she hadn't felt since Maria's death, a spark of connection, fragile but real. She looked away, her cheeks warming. "I'm not strong. I'm scared. That thing in the crypt, in my cell, it knows me. It wants me." Thomas's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that grounded her. "It's afraid of you, too. That dagger, your will, it backed off. That's not nothing." She glanced at the dagger, its blade hidden but its power undeniable. Maria didn't have a dagger. She didn't make it. "Then we'll make sure you do," Thomas said, his voice firm. "We'll find Rose, get proof, and end this. Together." The word, together, hung in the air, a promise that felt dangerous in its intimacy. Elizabeth's heart raced, not from fear but from the pull of his gaze, the shared vulnerability in the dark. She pulled her hand back, clutching the journal like a shield. "Tell me about the tunnels. What are we walking into?" Thomas nodded, sensing her need to refocus. He spread his map on the crate, pointing to the well entrance. "The tunnels are old, pre-Christian. Michael thought they were used for pagan rites before the convent was built. The order's using them now, hiding their real rituals from the other nuns. There's a chamber at the deepest point, Michael called it the sanctum. That's where they'll take Rose." Elizabeth's mind flashed to Rose's note, "The sacred sister is a lie. They want you. If they are targeting me, why take Rose?" "Bait," Thomas said grimly. "Or a test. The order's patient. They'll use her to draw you in." A creak outside made them freeze. Thomas grabbed his knife, motioning for silence. The air grew heavy, the same oppressive weight Elizabeth had felt in the crypt. A shadow passed the window, slow and deliberate, and a low hum vibrated through the shed's walls. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, its warmth pulsing against her palm. The shadow lingered, then moved on, the hum fading. "We can't stay here," Thomas whispered. "Back to the convent, before they lock it down. Tomorrow, we go in." Elizabeth nodded, her trust in him solidifying, if only for now. The night was a battlefield, and Thomas was her ally, perhaps more. As they slipped into the forest, the convent's tower light burned like an unblinking eye, watching their every move. Dawn broke over St. Agatha's, a grey veil that did little to dispel the convent's gloom. Elizabeth returned to her cell undetected, the dagger and journal hidden beneath her cot. The West Wing's chaos, Rose's wrecked cell, Clara's bloodied face, felt like a dream, but the note in her pocket was real, its warning stark: "They want you, Elizabeth." The plan to enter the tunnels with Thomas tonight was her only path forward, but the day stretched ahead, a gauntlet of suspicion and dread. She joined the morning prayers in the chapel, her presence a necessary facade. The nuns' chants were hollow, their faces pale and drawn. Mother Agnes stood at the altar, her eyes locking onto Elizabeth with a scrutiny that felt like a blade. Father Gabriel was absent, his absence more unsettling than his presence. Elizabeth scanned the pews for Clara, but the young nun was nowhere to be seen. Fear gnawed at her. Had Clara been taken, too? After prayers, Elizabeth lingered, pretending to adjust her rosary. She needed to search the West Wing again, to find any trace of Rose or Clara. As the nuns filed out, she slipped into a side corridor, her heart pounding. The West Wing was quieter now, its silence predatory. She retraced her steps to Rose's cell, hoping for a clue she'd missed. The cell was as she'd left it, cot overturned, crucifix defiled, serpent symbol scrawled on the wall. But something new caught her eye, a loose floorboard near the cot, pried up slightly. Elizabeth knelt, her fingers working the board free. Beneath it was a small hollow, containing a folded parchment and a silver pendant shaped like the serpent symbol. Her stomach churned as she opened the parchment, revealing a map, not of the convent, but of the tunnels below, identical to Thomas's but marked with a chamber labeled Sanctum. The map was in Rose's handwriting, with a note scrawled in the margin: "The Sanctum is their heart. Blood calls her. Don't trust Gabriel." Elizabeth's breath hitched. Rose had known about the Sanctum, had mapped it before her capture. The pendant, heavy in her hand, felt wrong, its metal unnaturally warm. She tucked it and the map into her habit, her mind racing. The sanctum was where the Order's rituals culminated, where Rose was likely held, and where the sacred sister would rise. A shadow fell across the doorway. Elizabeth spun, the dagger half drawn, but it was only Sister Helen, an older nun with a pinched face. "What are you doing here?" Helen demanded, her voice sharp. "I heard a noise," Elizabeth lied, standing to block the floorboard. "I thought someone was hurt." Helen's eyes narrowed, lingering on the serpent symbol. "This cell is forbidden. Mother Agnes's orders. Leave, now." Elizabeth nodded, her pulse racing as she brushed past Helen. The nun's gaze followed her, cold and suspicious. The west wing felt like a trap closing around her, the convent's walls alive with malice. She had to survive until nightfall, when she and Thomas would enter the tunnels. The sanctum was the key, but Rose's warning, "Blood calls her," echoed the demon's whisper. Elizabeth was being hunted, not just by the Order but by something far older. As she returned to her cell, a faint hum began, seeping from the walls. The pendant in her pocket pulsed, and the air grew heavy, as if the convent itself were breathing. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, its runes glowing faintly. The sanctum waited, and with it, the truth about Maria, and the fate the Order had planned for her. Night draped St. Agatha's convent in a shroud of mist, the forest beyond its walls alive with whispers that weren't entirely natural. Elizabeth moved through the cloister, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. The ritual dagger, Maria's journal, Rose's map, and the serpent pendant weighed heavily in her habit, each item a piece of the puzzle she and Thomas were racing to solve. The plan was set: meet at the old well, hidden by vines, and enter the tunnels to find the sanctum, where Rose might still be alive. But the convent's air was thick with menace, as if it knew her intentions and hungered to stop her. She slipped out through the kitchen door, the same path she'd taken to Thomas's shed. The forest loomed, its trees skeletal in the fog. The broken stone cross marked the way, and Elizabeth hurried, her breath clouding in the chill. The tower's light flickered behind her, a relentless eye that seemed to track her every step. The hum from the crypt, now a constant undercurrent, pulsed through the ground, growing stronger as she neared the well. Thomas waited by the well's crumbling stone rim, his groundskeeper's coat blending with the shadows. A coil of rope lay at his feet, and a lantern glowed dimly in his hand. His face softened when he saw her, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the trees. "You on time," he said, his voice low. "Good. We don't have long." Elizabeth pulled out Rose's map, its lines stark in the lantern's light. The sanctum's deep, past the main crypt. This entrance should bypass the patrols. Thomas nodded, tying the rope to a nearby tree. Michael's note said the tunnels are unstable. Stay close, and keep that dagger ready. Whatever's down there doesn't like it. She gripped the dagger's hilt, its warmth a faint reassurance. The pendant in her pocket pulsed, unbidden, and she pushed down the unease it stirred. What about Rose? If they're using her as bait, then we're walking into a trap, Thomas finished, his jaw tight. But we don't have a choice. Ready? Elizabeth nodded, her resolve stealing. Thomas lowered the rope into the well, its depths swallowing the light. She went first, her hands burning against the coarse fibers as she descended. The well's walls were slick with moss, the air growing colder, heavier, as she dropped. Thomas followed, his lantern casting jagged shadows that seemed to writhe. The well opened into a tunnel, its ceiling low and dripping with water. The serpent mosaic from Rose's map gleamed faintly on the floor, its eyes catching the lantern's glow. The hum was louder here, a physical force that pressed against Elizabeth's chest. She traced the map's path, leading them deeper, the walls narrowing until they had to move single file. A sudden tremor shook the tunnel, dust raining from the ceiling. Elizabeth stumbled, and Thomas caught her arm, his grip steady. "Keep moving," he whispered, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. The hum became a chant, not human, not animal, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the stone itself. Elizabeth's hand tightened on the dagger, its runes glowing faintly, as if sensing the presence ahead. The tunnel widened into a chamber, not a sanctum but a midpoint, its walls carved with scenes of sacrifice, figures bleeding into serpent mouths, their eyes hollow. At the center stood a stone basin, filled with a dark, viscous liquid that rippled without cause. Elizabeth's stomach churned. "This is what Maria saw," she whispered. "Blood for the altar." Before Thomas could respond, a figure stepped from the shadows, a nun, her habit tattered, her face hidden by a veil. Her voice was a hiss, layered with others. "You should not be here, Elizabeth. The sister waits." Elizabeth raised the dagger, its glow flaring. The nun recoiled, but the chant grew louder, and the chamber's walls seemed to pulse. Thomas grabbed her arm. "Run!" They fled, the nun's hiss chasing them as the tunnel trembled again, threatening to collapse. Elizabeth and Thomas burst from the tunnel into another chamber, this one smaller, its air thick with the stench of decay. The lantern's light revealed walls etched with serpent symbols, their lines glowing faintly, as if alive. The chant followed them, a relentless tide that drowned out their ragged breaths. Elizabeth's hand shook as she held the dagger, its runes burning brighter, a beacon against the darkness. The nun hadn't pursued, but the chamber felt like a trap, its silence more dangerous than the chase. Thomas set the lantern down, his knife drawn, his eyes scanning the shadows. "That wasn't a nun," he said, his voice tight. "Not anymore." Elizabeth nodded, her mind reeling. The nun's voice had echoed the demon's whisper in her cell, calling her to the sacred sister. Rose's note, "They want you, Elizabeth," was no longer a warning but a prophecy. She pulled out the map, her hands unsteady. "We're close to the sanctum. If Rose is there, we have to keep going." Thomas studied her, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "You're the one they are after. That thing knew your name." "Why?" She hesitated, the pendant's pulse in her pocket like a second heartbeat. Maria's journal had hinted at a chosen bloodline, a vessel for the sacred sister. Elizabeth had dismissed it as metaphor, but the demon's focus on her was undeniable. She opened the journal, flipping to a passage she'd overlooked. "The order seeks the marked one, born under the serpent's star. Her blood will open the veil." Her breath caught. She pulled the pendant from her pocket, its serpent shape glinting in the lantern's light. This was in Rose's cell. "It's warm, like it's alive." Maria never mentioned it, but... Thomas's eyes widened. "Michael wrote about a mark, a symbol the order used to identify their chosen." "Show me your hands." Elizabeth frowned but complied, holding out her palms. Thomas's face paled as he pointed to her left wrist, where a faint scar, shaped like a coiled serpent, marred her skin. She'd always thought it a childhood injury, barely noticeable. "That's no accident," Thomas said. It's their mark. Her stomach dropped. You're saying I'm, what? The sacred sister? Not yet, Thomas said, his voice firm. They need you to agree, to give yourself willingly. That's why they are pushing you, Rose, the crypt, all of it. They want you broken. Elizabeth's mind spun. The demons whisper, the nuns hiss, Rose's warning, it all pointed to her. Maria's death wasn't random, she'd been a threat to the Order's plan, and now Elizabeth was its target. The pendant grew hotter, and she dropped it, the metal clattering on the stone. The chant surged, and the chamber's walls pulsed faster, the serpent symbols glowing like embers. Thomas grabbed her hand, pulling her close. You're not theirs, Elizabeth. You're stronger than they know. We'll stop this, together. His touch, warm and steady, anchored her against the rising panic. Their eyes locked, a moment of raw connection amid the horror. She nodded, drawing strength from his resolve. Then we find the sanctum. For Rose. For Maria. A scream, human, desperate, echoed from deeper in the tunnels. Elizabeth's heart lurched. Rose, she whispered. Thomas grabbed the lantern, and they ran toward the sound, the dagger's glow lighting their path. The chamber's walls seemed to close in, the chant now a roar, as if the sanctum itself were calling them to their doom. The tunnels beneath St. Agatha's convent were a labyrinth of stone and shadow, their walls pulsing with the unholy chant that had haunted Elizabeth since her first night. She and Thomas ran toward Rose's scream, the ritual dagger's runes glowing like a beacon in her hand. The lantern in Thomas's grip cast jagged light across the tunnel's carvings, serpents devouring their tails, their eyes glinting as if alive. The air was thick, suffocating, each breath a struggle against the weight of the sanctum's call. Rose's scream had been raw, desperate, and it drove Elizabeth forward, her fear for her friend outweighing the terror of what lay ahead. Thomas led the way, his map clutched tightly, his knife ready. The sanctum's closed, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chant. Stay sharp. They know we're here. Elizabeth nodded, her wrist burning where the serpent scar marked her skin. The pendant, left behind in the previous chamber, had pulsed with the same rhythm as the chant, confirming her role as the Order's chosen vessel. Maria's journal, tucked in her habit, held clues to stop the ritual, but its warnings about the sacred sister, her blood will open the veil, echoed in her mind. She wasn't just fighting for Rose or Maria, she was fighting to escape a destiny she hadn't chosen. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to duck under sagging beams. The ground trembled, a low rumble that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Elizabeth stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The carvings beneath her fingers felt warm, almost alive, and the chant surged, a chorus of voices now distinctly human, nuns, pleading, screaming, their words lost in a language older than Latin. Keep moving, Thomas urged, pulling her forward. But the tunnel forked, and Rose's scream echoed again, fainter, from the left path. Thomas hesitated, checking the map. This isn't right. The sanctum should be straight ahead. It's a trap, Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. They're luring us. Before Thomas could respond, a gust of icy air roared through the tunnel, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed them, the daggers glowed their only light. Footsteps echoed behind, fast, unnatural, like claws skittering on stone. Elizabeth spun, raising the dagger, its runes flaring. Shapes moved in the gloom, nuns, their habits tattered, their faces pale and twisted, their eyes black voids. They weren't human, not anymore, their movements jerky, as if pulled by invisible strings. "Run!" Thomas shouted, grabbing her arm. They sprinted down the left path, the nuns' hisses chasing them. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls closing in, the chant now a deafening roll. Elizabeth's lungs burned, but the dagger's warmth kept her grounded, its power pushing back the darkness. Thomas slashed at a low beam, collapsing it to slow their pursuers, but the nuns clawed through, relentless. The path ended at a heavy iron gate, its surface etched with the serpent symbol. Rose's scream came from beyond, weaker now, laced with pain. Elizabeth pounded on the gate, her hands bleeding, but it wouldn't budge. Thomas searched for a lock, his knife useless against the ancient metal. "It's sealed," he said, his voice tight. "We need a key, or something else." Elizabeth's eyes fell on the dagger, its runes pulsing in sync with the gate's carvings. She pressed the blade against the serpent symbol, and a jolt shot through her, like lightning in her veins. The gate groaned, grinding open, but the nuns were closing in, their hisses forming words, "The sister, she comes." Elizabeth and Thomas slipped through, the gate slamming shut behind them. The nuns' claws scraped at the iron, but the barrier held. For now, they were safe, but the scream had stopped, and the silence was worse. The chamber beyond the gate was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with niches holding skeletal remains draped in tattered habits. The air was rancid, thick with the stench of blood and decay. At the center stood a massive altar, larger than the one in the crypt, its surface carved with a serpent mosaic that seemed to writhe in the dagger's glow. Black candles encircled it, their flames burning without wax, casting a sickly green light. Elizabeth's heart sank. This wasn't the sanctum, but it was close, a place of sacrifice where the Order's rituals reached their peak. Thomas set the lantern down, its flame flickering back to life. "Rose was here," he said, pointing to a smear of fresh blood on the altar's edge. "They moved her." Elizabeth's throat tightened. Rose's scream, her note, the pendant, all pointed to a trap, and they'd walked right into it. She approached the altar, the dagger's warmth pulsing in her hand. The blood was still wet, and beside it lay a torn piece of Rose's rosary, its beads crushed. Her eyes stung with tears, but anger burned hotter. "They are playing with us," she said. "They want me here." Thomas's hand rested on her shoulder, a steady anchor. "We're not done yet. The sanctum's deeper. We'll find her." Before she could respond, the candles flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling. The chant returned, no longer distant but immediate, emanating from the altar itself. The mosaic's serpent eyes glowed, and a voice, not the demon's chorus but a single, familiar one, spoke from the shadows, "Elizabeth, why did you come?" Elizabeth froze, her blood turning to ice. It was Maria's voice, soft and sorrowful, but warped, as if spoken through a veil of pain. She turned, the dagger raised, and saw her, Maria, or something wearing her form, standing at the chamber's edge. Her habit was stained with blood, her face pale, her eyes hollow but brimming with tears. "Maria?" Elizabeth whispered, her voice breaking. Thomas stepped beside her, his knife ready, but his face was pale, uncertain. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, its voice fracturing into a hiss. "They took me to feed her. The sacred sister needs blood, and yours is next." Elizabeth's knees buckled, but she held the dagger steady. "You're not Maria. What are you?" The figure's lips curled into a smile that wasn't human. She fought, you know. Maria saw the truth. The Order's God isn't yours. They bled her on this altar, not to kill, but to summon. Her soul, it lingers, trapped in the veil. And you, the figure stepped closer, its form flickering. You're the vessel they've waited for. The marked one. Thomas lunged, his knife slashing through the figure, but it dissolved into mist, its laughter echoing. The altar's candles flared again, and the mosaic pulsed, revealing an inscription beneath the blood. "Through the chosen, the veil is torn." Elizabeth's scar burned, a searing pain that confirmed the figure's words. Maria hadn't just been killed, she'd been sacrificed, her soul bound to the Order's ritual. And Elizabeth, with her serpent mark, was meant to complete it. The journal's warnings, Rosie's note, the pendant, all pointed to a truth she couldn't escape. The Order had chosen her long before she arrived. "We have to destroy this altar," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling but resolute. "If it's feeding the ritual." Thomas nodded, grabbing a loose stone from the floor. But as he raised it, the chamber shook, the niche's skeletons rattling. Shadows coalesced around the altar, forming figures, nuns, their faces decayed, their hands reaching. The chant became a scream, and the air grew suffocating, pressing Elizabeth to her knees. Thomas pulled her up, his eyes fierce. "Not here. We need the sanctum. That's where it ends." They fled, the shadows' screams chasing them deeper into the tunnels. The altar's inscription burned in Elizabeth's mind, a truth that changed everything. Maria's soul was trapped, and Elizabeth's blood was the key to the Order's apocalypse. The sanctum was their last hope, but the shadows were closing in, and the demon knew her name. The tunnels beneath St. Agatha's convent were a suffocating maze, their walls alive with the screams of shadow nuns clawing at Elizabeth and Thomas as they fled the sacrificial chamber. The ritual dagger's runes blazed in Elizabeth's hand, its glow a fragile shield against the darkness that hungered for her marked blood. Thomas gripped his lantern, its flickering light revealing glimpses of the tunnel's carvings, serpents twisting into faces frozen in agony, their eyes seeming to track their every move. The chant, a relentless tide of voices, pounded in Elizabeth's skull, urging her to surrender, to become the sacred sister the Order of the Veil had chosen her for. "Keep going," Thomas shouted, his voice hoarse as he slashed at a low vine blocking their path. The map to the sanctum, clutched in his other hand, was their only guide, but the tunnels seemed to shift, their paths curling back on themselves like the serpent's tail. Rose's scream, now silent, haunted Elizabeth, a reminder of the stakes. Maria's apparition, her soul trapped in the veil, had shattered Elizabeth's heart, but it also fueled her rage. The Order had taken her sister, and now they wanted her. She wouldn't let them win. The shadows surged closer, their forms coalescing into nuns with decayed faces, their hands outstretched, nails dripping with black ichor. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its glow flaring, and the nearest shadow shrieked, dissolving into mist. But more came, their hisses forming words. "The marked one, the veil awaits." The tunnel trembled, stones cracking above, threatening to bury them. Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her into a side passage. "This way," he said, checking the map. The passage was narrower, its ceiling sagging, but the shadows hesitated, as if the dagger's power held them at bay. Elizabeth's wrist burned where the serpent scar marked her, a searing reminder of Maria's warning, "Your blood will open the veil." She pushed the thought aside, focusing on Thomas's steady presence, his determination a lifeline in the chaos. The passage opened into a small cavern, its walls glistening with moisture, its floor littered with broken bones, human, ancient, their ends gnawed. A single exit led deeper, toward the sanctum, but the shadows' screams echoed behind, growing louder. Thomas set the lantern down, his face grim. "We can't outrun them forever. We need to block the passage." Elizabeth nodded, spotting a pile of loose stones near the cavern's entrance. They worked quickly, stacking the rocks, their hands bleeding from the jagged edges. The dagger's glow dimmed, its power waning as the chant intensified. The shadows reached the cavern, their forms pressing against the makeshift barrier, their nails scraping like knives. Elizabeth's breath came in gasps, her strength faltering, but Thomas's hand on her steadied her. "Hold on," he said, his eyes fierce. "We're close. I won't let them take you." The barrier held, the shadow screams muffled but unrelenting. Elizabeth clutched the dagger, its warmth returning, as if fueled by her resolve. She pulled out Rose's map, its lines faint in the lantern's light. "The sanctum's through that exit," she said. "If Rose is alive, she's there." Thomas's gaze softened, a flicker of something deeper than alliance passing between them. "Then we go together. No matter what." They moved toward the exit, the shadow screams fading but the chant growing stronger, a siren call to the sanctum. Elizabeth's scar pulsed, a warning of the destiny awaiting her. She tightened her grip on the dagger, ready to face whatever lay ahead, for Rose, for Maria, and for herself. The tunnel to the sanctum was a descent into the earth's heart, its air so thick with decay that each breath felt like swallowing ash. Elizabeth and Thomas moved cautiously, the lantern's light barely piercing the gloom. The dagger's runes glowed steadily now, pulse that matched Elizabeth's heartbeat, as if it knew the sanctum's power. Maria's journal, tucked in her habit, held the truth of her sister's sacrifice. Her soul bled to feed the veil, and Rose's map pointed to the chamber where the Order's ritual would culminate. But the silence was worse than the shadow screams, a predator lying in wait. Thomas led, his map guiding them through twists and turns, his knife ready for whatever emerged from the dark. Elizabeth followed, her mind churning with Maria's apparition and the serpent scar that marked her as the Order's vessel. The chant had softened, but it lingered, a whisper that curled around her thoughts, urging her to embrace the sacred sister's call. She fought it, focusing on Thomas's back, his presence a shield against the convent's malice. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, not the sanctum but a threshold, its walls carved with a frieze of hooded figures offering blood to a colossal serpent. At the center stood a stone pillar, its surface etched with runes that matched the daggers. A leather-bound book rested on it, its cover embossed with the serpent symbol, its pages yellowed and stained. Elizabeth's heart leapt. This could be the Order's grimoire, the key to their rituals. "Stay back," Thomas warned, scanning the shadows. But Elizabeth approached, drawn to the book. She opened it, her hands trembling, and found pages filled with chants, diagrams of altars, and a prophecy. The marked one, born of the serpent's line, shall birth the sister through blood and will. Her scar burned, and she slammed the book shut, her breath ragged. "It's about me," she whispered. "They've been planning this for years." Thomas moved to her side, his hand on her shoulder. "We'll destroy it. All of it." Before she could respond, a voice echoed from the chamber's entrance, soft, familiar, and chilling. "You're too late, Elizabeth." They spun, the dagger raised, to see Sister Clara standing in the shadows, her habit pristine, her face serene but wrong, her eyes glinting with an unnatural light. Elizabeth's heart sank. Clara, who'd returned Maria's journal, who'd bled in Rose's cell, was here, unharmed and unafraid. "Clara," Elizabeth said, stepping forward. "What are you doing here?" Clara's smile was cold, her voice layered with the chant's cadence. "Serving the sister. You were meant to come, Elizabeth. The mark chose you, but you needed persuasion." Thomas's knife gleamed as he stepped between them. "She's with the order," he growled. "She's been playing us." Elizabeth's mind reeled. Clara's fear, her blooded cheek, it had been a lie, a lure to draw Elizabeth deeper. "You took Rose," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You let them kill Maria." Clara tilted her head, her smile widening. "Maria was a sacrifice. Rose is a tool. You, Elizabeth, are the prize. The veil hungers, and your blood will tear it open." The chamber trembled, the pillars' runes flaring. Shadows coalesced behind Clara, forming nuns with black eyes, their hisses joining the chant. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its glow blazing, but Clara's laugh cut through the noise, sharp and mocking. "You can't fight fate," Clara said, stepping closer. "Join us, or the sanctum will claim you." Thomas lunged, his knife aimed at Clara, but she vanished, her form dissolving into mist. The shadow nuns surged forward, their claws slashing. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its power scattering them, but the chamber's walls pulsed, the friez's serpent seeming to slither. Clara's voice echoed, "Now everywhere, the sanctum waits. Come, Elizabeth." Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the chamber's exit. "She's stalling us. We have to reach Rose before they finish the ritual." They ran, the shadows reforming behind them, Clara's laughter a relentless taunt. Elizabeth's scar burned, her heart torn by Clara's betrayal. The young nun had been her ally, or so she'd thought, but the Order's reach was deeper than she'd imagined. The sanctum was their last chance to save Rose and stop the ritual, but Clara's words, "You can't fight fate," clung to her, a poison she fought to reject. Thomas's hand in hers was her anchor, a reminder that she wasn't alone, but the sanctum's call grew louder, and the veil's hunger was insatiable. The tunnels beneath St. Agatha's convent were a suffocating descent into madness, their walls vibrating with the chant of the Order of the Veil, a relentless summons that clawed at Elizabeth's soul. She and Thomas ran, their breaths ragged, the ritual dagger's runes casting a fierce glow that barely held back the shadows pursuing them. The shadow nuns, their decayed faces twisted with hunger, hissed her name, Elizabeth, the marked one, their claws scraping the stone as they closed in. Thomas's lantern swung widely, its light revealing glimpses of the tunnel's carvings, serpents entwined with human forms, their mouths open in silent screams. "We're almost there," Thomas shouted, his voice strained as he checked Rose's map, its lines smudged with sweat and blood. The sanctum, the heart of the Order's ritual, was close, its pull undeniable. Elizabeth's serpent scar burned, a searing reminder of Clara's betrayal and Maria's warning. Her blood was the key to tearing the veil, unleashing the sacred sister. Rose's fate, her screams now silent, drove Elizabeth forward, but fear for Thomas, her only ally, gnawed at her. The tunnel widened, opening into a vast chamber that felt like the earth's wounded heart. The sanctum's threshold loomed before them, a massive stone arch carved with serpents, their eyes glowing red, as if lit by an inner fire. Beyond the arch, a green haze pulsed, and the chant became a roar, layered with screams that weren't human. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sulfur, and the ground was slick with something viscous, reflecting the dagger's light. Thomas stopped, his knife raised, his eyes scanning the chamber. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The sanctums through that archway has to be there." Elizabeth nodded, her grip on the dagger tightening. The shadow nuns' hisses grew louder, their forms coalescing at the chamber's entrance. She glanced at Thomas, his face etched with determination, and felt a surge of gratitude, and something deeper, unspoken. "If we don't make it," she said, her voice trembling, "thank you for believing in me." Thomas's gaze met hers, fierce and unguarded. "We're making it, Elizabeth. For Rose. For Maria. For Michael." Before she could respond, the shadow nuns surged into the chamber, their claws slashing. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its runes flaring, and a wave of light scattered the nearest figures, their screams echoing like shattered glass. Thomas fought beside her, his knife slicing through mist-like forms, but the shadows reformed, relentless. The chamber trembled, stones falling from the ceiling, and the arch's glow intensified, as if the sanctum were calling them. "We can't hold them!" Thomas shouted, dodging a claw that grazed his arm, drawing blood. "Through the arch, now!" Elizabeth ran, Thomas at her side, the daggers glowed their only shield. The shadow nuns pursued, their hisses blending with the chant, urging her to surrender. She reached the arch, its red-eyed serpent seeming to watch, and crossed the threshold. The air shifted, heavy and electric, like stepping into a storm's heart. The shadow nuns stopped at the arch, their forms writhing but unable to pass, as if barred by an unseen force. The chamber beyond was smaller, a prelude to the sanctum, its walls lined with iron chains dangling from hooks. At its center stood a stone table, stained with blood, and on it lay a tattered habit, roses, torn and empty. Elizabeth's heart sank, her breath catching. "She's gone," she whispered, her voice breaking. Thomas touched her shoulder, his hand steady. "Not yet. The sanctum's deeper. We keep going." But the chains rattled, unprovoked, and the chant surged, a voice within it calling her name. Elizabeth's scar burned, and the dagger's glow flickered, as if struggling against the sanctum's power. The order was close, and the veil was thinning. They had to move, but the empty habit was a warning, time was running out. The prelude chamber was a tomb of iron and blood, its chains swaying as if stirred by an unseen breath. Elizabeth stood by the stone table, Rose's torn habit clutched in her hands, its fabric stained with blood that was still wet. The sanctum's green haze pulsed beyond a narrow passage ahead, the chant now a deafening roar that seemed to come from within her own skull. The ritual dagger's runes flickered, its power waning under the weight of the order's ritual. Thomas's lantern cast long shadows, his face pale but resolute as he studied Rose's map, searching for the final path to the sanctum. "We're close," Thomas said, his voice tight. "The map ends here, but that passage must lead to the sanctum. Rose is there, I know it." Elizabeth nodded, but her heart was heavy with dread. Clara's betrayal, her serene smile as she revealed her allegiance to the order, had shattered her trust, and Rose's empty habit felt like a death sentence. Maria's apparition, her soul trapped in the veil, haunted her, a reminder of the cost of failure. Her serpent scar throbbed, a constant pull toward the destiny she fought to reject. The Order wanted her blood, her will, to birth the sacred sister, and every step toward the sanctum felt like a surrender. Thomas noticed her silence, his eyes softening. "Elizabeth, talk to me. What's wrong?" She looked at him, his rugged face lit by the lantern, his presence a lifeline in the convent's darkness. The weight of her fear, her guilt, spilled over. "I'm the reason they are doing this," she said, her voice cracking. "My blood, my mark, they killed Maria to get to me. Rose is suffering because of me. If I go into the sanctum, I might become what they want." Thomas set the lantern down, stepping closer. "You're not theirs," he said, his voice fierce. "You're Elizabeth, Maria's sister, Rose's friend. You're fighting for them, not for some prophecy. That dagger, your strength, it's proof you can resist." His words stirred something in her, a spark of hope amid the despair. She met his gaze, her breath unsteady. "I'm scared, Thomas. Not just of them, but of myself. What if I'm not strong enough?" He took her hand, his touch warm and steady, grounding her against the chant's pull. "You don't have to be strong alone," he said. "I've been running from Michael's death, thinking I could fix it by myself. But you've shown me we're stronger together. I'm with you, Elizabeth, no matter what." The air between them crackled, a moment of raw vulnerability that transcended the horror around them. Elizabeth's heart raced, not from fear but from the intensity of his gaze, the unspoken promise in his touch. She leaned closer, their faces inches apart, and for a heartbeat, the sanctum's chant faded, drowned by the pull of something human, something real. Their lips brushed, a desperate, fleeting kiss that tasted of fear and hope, a defiance of the darkness closing in. A scream, Rose's, unmistakable, shattered the moment, echoing from the passage. Elizabeth pulled back, her cheeks flushed, the dagger's glow flaring as if spurred by her resolve. Thomas's eyes held hers, a silent vow, before he grabbed the lantern. "Let's end this," he said. They ran toward the screen, the passage narrowing, its walls etched with runes that bled black ichor. The chant became a physical force, pushing against them, but Elizabeth's scar burned with defiance, not surrender. The kiss, brief as it was, had ignited something in her, a will to fight, not just for Maria or Rose, but for herself, for Thomas, for a future beyond the veil. The passage ended at a stone door, its surface carved with a serpent swallowing a star, its eyes glowing green. Rose's scream came from beyond, weaker now, laced with agony. Elizabeth pressed the dagger against the door, its runes aligning with the carvings, and the stone shuddered, grinding open. The green haze poured out, blinding, and the chant roared, calling her name. They stepped through, the sanctum's threshold crossed, but a new sound joined the chant, a low, guttural laugh, not human, not nun, but something ancient, waiting. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, Thomas's hand brushing hers, and they faced the darkness together, ready for the horror that awaited. The sanctum's green haze swallowed Elizabeth and Thomas as they crossed the stone door's threshold, the air thick with a pulse that wasn't sound but feeling, a heartbeat older than the earth. The ritual dagger's runes blazed in Elizabeth's hand, its glow a defiant spark against the darkness that pressed from all sides. The chant of the Order of the Veil roared, a cacophony of voices, human, demonic, and something in between, calling her name, urging her to surrender her marked blood to the sacred sister. Thomas's lantern flickered, its light bending as if underwater, revealing glimpses of the sanctum, a vast cavern, its walls slick with black ichor, its ceiling a dome of carved serpents whose eyes burned like embers. Rose's scream, now a faint whimper, came from the chamber's center, where a massive altar loomed, its surface a mosaic of serpents entwined with human bones. Black candles encircled it, their flames green and unwavering, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently. On the altar lay Rose, her habit torn, her wrists bound with iron chains, her face pale and streaked with blood. Her eyes, wide with terror, met Elizabeth's, and she mouthed a single word, "Run." Elizabeth's heart lurched, but she stepped forward, the dagger raised. "We're getting you out," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. Thomas moved beside her, his knife ready, his map discarded. Rose was here, and the sanctum was the endgame. Before they could reach her, the candles flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling. The chant surged, and figures emerged from the haze, nuns in black veils, their faces hidden, their hands clutching daggers etched with runes. At their head stood Father Gabriel, his cassock pristine, his smile radiant but cold, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice smooth as venom, "you've come home." Thomas lunged, his knife aimed at Gabriel, but a nun intercepted, her dagger clashing with his. Elizabeth swung her own blade, its runes flaring, and the nearest nun recoiled, her veil falling to reveal a face half decayed, her eyes black voids. The sanctum trembled, stones cracking above, and the altar's mosaic pulsed, its serpent seeming to slither. "Stop her!" Gabriel commanded, his voice layered with the chant. The nuns advanced, their movements unnaturally fast, their daggers glinting. Elizabeth fought, the dagger's power surging through her, scattering the nuns like ash. Thomas grappled with another, his arm bleeding from a slash, but he held his ground, shouting her name. Elizabeth reached Rose, slicing through her chains with the dagger. Rose collapsed, her breath shallow, her voice a whisper. "It's you, they need you, the veil." Before she could finish, Gabriel raised his hand, and the altar's candles exploded, their flames forming a green wall that separated Elizabeth from Thomas and Rose. The chant became a scream, and the haze thickened, coalescing into a shape, not a nun, not human, but a towering presence with eyes like burning coals. Its voice was a chorus, echoing Maria's, "The marked one, give yourself." Elizabeth's scar seared, her vision blurring as the presence pressed against her mind, urging her to kneel, to offer her blood. She gripped the dagger, its warmth her only anchor, and screamed, "I'm not yours." The presence recoiled, but Gabriel laughed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You can't fight the veil, Elizabeth." Maria tried, and her soul feeds it still. "Join her, or they all die." Thomas broke through the flame wall, tackling Gabriel, but the nuns dragged him back, their claws digging into his flesh. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its glow flaring, and the presence hissed, retreating into the haze. She grabbed Rose, pulling her toward the passage, but the sanctum's power was overwhelming, the altar's mosaic now a writhing mass of serpents. "We have to destroy it," Elizabeth shouted, her eyes on the altar. But the nuns closed in, and Gabriel rose, his smile unbroken, as if the sanctum itself protected him. The fight was far from over, and the veil's hunger was insatiable. Elizabeth dragged Rose toward the sanctum's passage, the ritual dagger's glow dimming under the weight of the veil's presence. Thomas fought against the shadow nuns, his knife flashing, his face blooded but fierce. The altar's serpents writhed, their mosaic eyes glowing green, and the chant roared, a symphony of despair that threatened to drown Elizabeth's will. Rose's weight was heavy, her body limp, her whispers incoherent but laced with fear. Your blood, they've always known. The sanctum's green haze pulsed, and Father Gabriel stood untouched, his hands raised as if conducting the chaos. You cannot escape your destiny, Elizabeth, he said, his voice resonating with the chant. Your bloodline was chosen centuries ago. Maria was a stepping stone, a sacrifice to prepare the veil. You are its culmination. Elizabeth's scar burned, a searing pain that confirmed his words. Maria's journal had hinted at a chosen bloodline, but Gabriel's revelation was a knife to her heart. Her family, her mother, her grandmother, had they been hunted, too? She tightened her grip on the dagger, its runes flickering, and glared at Gabriel. I'll die before I let you win. Gabriel's smile widened, his eyes glinting with malice. Death is not enough. The veil demands your will, your soul. You felt it, haven't you? The call? She had, the whispers in her cell, the presence in the crypt, the pull of the sanctum's chant. It was her scar, her blood, drawing her to the sacred sister's embrace. But Thomas's voice broke through, shouting her name as he threw off a nun, his knife buried in her mist-like form. Elizabeth! Get Rose out! I'll hold them! Her heart tore at the thought of leaving him, but Rose's life hung by a thread. She pulled Rose into the passage, the haze following like a living thing. The shadow nuns pursued, their hisses blending with Gabriel's laughter, but the dagger's glow flared, scattering them. The passage was narrow, its walls slick with ichor, and the chant followed, a relentless tide. Rose stirred, her voice weak. Elizabeth, it's not just you. The bloodline, they've been watching us, since birth. Elizabeth's breath caught. What do you mean? Rose's eyes, glassy with pain, met hers. Your mother, she was here. A nun, long ago. She fled, but they found her. Maria, you're theirs. The words hit like a blow. Her mother, a nun at St. Agatha's? Elizabeth's memories of her mother were faint, soft hands, a lullaby, a sudden absence when she was 5. Maria had raised her, never speaking of their past. Was their family cursed, hunted by the order across generations? The journal's cryptic notes, the serpent's scar, Rose's warning, it all fit, a tapestry of horror woven before her birth. The passage trembled, stones falling, and the shadow nun's claws scraped closer. Elizabeth pulled Rose deeper, her mind reeling. The sanctum's altar was the key, destroy it, and the ritual might fail. But Gabriel's words, your will, your soul, clung to her, a poison she fought to reject. Thomas's sacrifice, holding the nuns at bay, gave her time, and she wouldn't waste it. The passage opened into a smaller chamber, a dead end with a single stone slab, its surface etched with a serpent swallowing a star. Rose collapsed, her breath shallow, and Elizabeth knelt beside her, the dagger's glow dimming. The chant surged, and a new sound joined it, a low, guttural laugh, emanating from the slab. The serpent's eyes glowed, and the stone cracked, revealing a hidden stair descending deeper. Elizabeth, Rose whispered, her hand gripping hers. Don't let them take you. I won't, Elizabeth vowed, her voice fierce. She lifted Rose, her strength fueled by rage and love, for Maria, for Rose, for Thomas. The stair led to the true sanctum, she was sure, but the laugh was a warning, the orders God was waiting. She glanced back, praying Thomas would follow, her heart aching with the memory of their kiss. The dagger pulsed, its runes a faint hope. As she descended, the veil's hunger closing around her like a noose. The hidden stair beneath St. Agatha's convent descended into a darkness that felt alive, its air thick with a pulse that pressed against Elizabeth's skin like a second heartbeat. She carried Rose, her friend's frail body a dead weight in her arms, the ritual dagger clutched tightly in one hand. Its runes flickered, their glow struggling against the oppressive force of the true sanctum below. The chant of the Order of the Veil roared in her ears, a cacophony of voices, desperate, exultant, demonic, calling her to fulfill her cursed destiny as the marked vessel for the sacred sister. Her serpent scar burned, a searing brand that echoed Rose's revelation. Elizabeth's mother, a nun at St. Agatha's, had fled the order, but their bloodline was forever bound to the veil. The stair ended in a cavern vast enough to swallow sound, its walls glistening with black ichor that dripped like tears. The true sanctum was a cathedral of horror, its ceiling a writhing mass of carved serpents, their eyes glowing green, casting a sickly light. At the center stood an altar unlike any before, towering, obsidian, its surface a living mosaic of serpents that pulsed with each chant. A pool of dark liquid, too viscous to be water, surrounded it, rippling without cause. Chains dangled from the altar, empty but stained with blood, and a single black candle burned at its peak, its flame a void that seemed to drink the light. Elizabeth set Rose down gently, her friend's breath shallow, her eyes fluttering. "Stay with me," Elizabeth whispered, brushing Rose's blood-streaked hair from her face. Rose's warning, "Your blood," they've always known, clung to her, a truth that reshaped her world. Maria, her mother, now her, generations hunted by the Order, their blood a key to an apocalypse she barely understood. The chant surged, and the pool rippled violently, its surface forming shapes, faces, screaming, dissolving back into the dark. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its runes flaring, but the sanctum's power was overwhelming, pressing against her mind, urging her to kneel, to offer her blood. Her scar throbbed, and a voice, not Maria's, not Clara's, but deeper, ancient, spoke from the altar, "Child of the serpent, the veil awaits. Join us, and live forever." She staggered, the dagger's warmth her only anchor. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The voice laughed, a sound that shook the cavern, and the serpents on the altar writhed faster, their mosaic forming a face, not human, but a woman's, with eyes like burning coals. The sacred sister, or its shadow, was waking. Footsteps echoed from the stair. Elizabeth spun, hoping for Thomas, but it was Mother Agnes, her black habit pristine, her face serene yet cold, her eyes glinting with the same green as the sanctum's light. Behind her stood shadow nuns, their claws dripping ichor, their hisses blending with the chant. Agnes's presence was a blade, cutting through Elizabeth's resolve. "You've come far, Elizabeth," Agnes said, her voice soft but laced with malice. "Your mother fled this place, thinking she could escape. Maria fought, thinking she could stop us. But you were born for this." Elizabeth's heart pounded, her grip on the dagger tightening. "Where's Thomas?" she demanded, her voice raw. Agnes's smile was thin. "Your groundskeeper is occupied. The sanctum demands only you." Rose stirred, her voice a whisper. "Elizabeth, don't listen, it's a lie." Agnes's gaze flicked to Rose, her smile fading. "Silence her," she commanded, and a shadow nun lunged, its claws aimed at Rose's throat. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its glow flaring, and the nun dissolved, but more advanced, their hisses deafening. She stood over Rose, the dagger her shield, but the sanctum's chant was relentless, pulling at her will, a scar of fire that threatened to consume her. "You can't fight forever," Agnes said, stepping closer. "The veil is your birthright. Embrace it, or lose everything." Elizabeth's vision blurred, the voice from the altar echoing Agnes's words. But Rose's hand gripped hers, weak but real, and she remembered Thomas's kiss, his vow to fight together. She wouldn't surrender, not yet. She swung the dagger at Agnes, its glow blazing, and the sanctum trembled, the altar's face hissing in rage. The sanctum's altar pulsed, its serpent mosaic twisting into a grotesque parody of a woman's face, its coal-like eyes fixed on Elizabeth as she faced Mother Agnes. The ritual dagger's wounds burned in her hand, its power a fragile barrier against the shadow nuns circling her and Rose. The chant roared, a tidal wave of voices that drowned out Rose's faint breaths, urging Elizabeth to offer her marked blood to the sacred sister. Her scar seared, a reminder of her bloodline's curse, her mother's flight, Maria's sacrifice, and now her own role as the Order's vessel. Agnes stood unmoved, her serene malice a stark contrast to the chaos, her words echoing the altar's voice, "The veil is your birthright." Elizabeth's swing had missed Agnes, the dagger's glow scattering the shadow nuns but leaving the Mother Superior untouched. Agnes's smile returned, colder now, as she raised a hand, and the altar's candle flared, its void-like flame casting shadows that formed a figure, not a nun, but a woman in a flowing robe, her face obscured, her presence a weight that crushed the air. The sacred sister's shadow, or something worse, stood between Elizabeth and Agnes, its voice a chorus that spoke in her mind, "Your blood is ours. Your soul is ours. Kneel, and be eternal." Elizabeth's knees buckled, the dagger's glow dimming as the figure's eyes, burning, endless, bore into her. Rose's hand slipped from hers, her friend's body still, her breath barely audible. Fear for Thomas, left behind in the upper sanctum, tore at her heart, but the figure's pull was stronger, a tide dragging her toward surrender. Her scar pulsed in rhythm with the altar, and memories flashed, Maria's laughter, her mother's lullaby, Thomas's kiss, each one a thread she clung to against the veil's hunger. "You feel it, don't you?" Agnes said, her voice cutting through the chant. "The sister is not a myth. She is the truth beneath your God, older than your faith. Your bloodline was hers from the beginning." Elizabeth's vision swam, but a new sound broke through, a shout, raw and human. Thomas stumbled into the sanctum, his coat torn, his arm bleeding, his knife dripping ichor. He'd fought through the shadow nuns above, his face etched with desperation as he saw her. "Elizabeth," he called, lunging toward her, but Agnes gestured, and the figure's shadows lashed out, binding him in chains of mist. "No!" Elizabeth screamed, the dagger flaring as she slashed at the shadows, freeing Thomas. He collapsed beside her, his breath ragged, but his hand found hers, a lifeline that steadied her against the sanctum's pull. The figure hissed, its form flickering, and Agnes's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "You're stronger than Maria," Agnes said, her voice sharp. "But the sister doesn't need your consent. Your blood will suffice." The altar's mosaic split, revealing a hidden compartment, a grimoire, its pages glowing with runes, and a vial of dark liquid, pulsing like a heart. Agnes seized the vial, her voice rising in a chant that matched the sanctum's roar. "The sister is not one, but many," she intoned. "Your blood will bind her, Elizabeth, as Maria's bound her soul." The revelation hit like a blow. The sacred sister wasn't a single entity but a collective, a legion of souls trapped in a veil, fed by the Order's sacrifices. Maria's soul, Rose's suffering, her mother's flight, all were pieces of a ritual spanning centuries, culminating in Elizabeth's blood. The vial, she realized, held Maria's essence, a final ingredient to complete the summoning. Thomas pulled her close, his voice urgent. "We destroyed the grimoire," he whispered. "It's their anchor." Elizabeth nodded, her resolve reigniting. She lunged for the altar, the dagger raised, but Agnes threw the vial, and it shattered at her feet, the liquid burning her skin. The figure solidified, its robe now a writhing mass of serpents, its face a mirror of Elizabeth's own, twisted and wrong. "You are me," it said, its voice her own, layered with Maria's, with countless others. The sanctum shook, the serpents on the walls slithering free, their hisses joining the chant. Elizabeth screamed, the dagger's glow blazing as she stabbed at the figure, its form dissolving but reforming. Thomas tackled Agnes, wrestling her to the ground, but the shadow nuns surged, their claws slashing. Rose stirred, her voice a faint plea, "Elizabeth, the altar." Elizabeth's eyes locked on the grimoire, its runes pulsing with the figure's power. She had to destroy it, but the figure's gaze held her, her scar a fire that threatened to consume her. Thomas's shout, Rose's whisper, and Maria's memory were her anchors, pulling her back from the abyss. She raised the dagger, ready to strike, as the sanctum's horror closed in. The true sanctum beneath St. Agatha's convent was a crucible of horror, its obsidian altar pulsing with the life of 1,000 serpents, their mosaic eyes burning into Elizabeth's soul. The ritual dagger's runes blazed in her hand, a desperate beacon against the demonic figure that wore her face, its serpent robe writhing as it reached for her. The chant of the Order of the Veil was a physical force, a tidal wave of voices, Maria's, her mother's, countless others, urging her to offer her marked blood to the sacred sister, a legion of trapped souls bound to the veil. Mother Agnes lay pinned by Thomas, her serene malice unbroken, while Rose, barely conscious, whispered warnings from the blood-soaked floor. The grimoire, its glowing runes the anchor of the ritual, lay exposed on the altar, Elizabeth's only target. The figure's voice, a mirror of her own, echoed in her mind, "You are me. Your blood is mine. Kneel, and be eternal." Her serpent scar seared, a fire that threatened to unravel her world, but Thomas's shout, "Elizabeth, now!" cut through the haze. He wrestled Agnes, his knife at her throat, but shadow nuns surged, their claws slashing his back. Rose's hand, weak but insistent, gripped Elizabeth's ankle, her eyes pleading, "The altar, end it." Elizabeth lunged for the grimoire, the dagger raised, but the figure materialized before her, its coal-like eyes swallowing the light. Its touch was ice, burning her skin, and her scar pulsed, drawing her toward surrender. Memories flashed, Maria's laughter, her mother's lullaby, Thomas's kiss, and she clung to them, her heart a fortress against the veil's pull. She slashed the dagger, its runes flaring, and the figure hissed, its form fracturing but reforming, stronger, angrier. "You cannot stop the sister," Agnes intoned, her voice rising above the chant. "Her power is older than your God, woven into your bloodline. Maria's soul is ours, and yours will follow." Elizabeth's rage ignited, a fire hotter than her scar. "Maria's not yours," she snarled, swinging the dagger at the grimoire. The blade struck the book, its runes exploding in a burst of green light. The sanctum shook, stones falling from the serpent dome, and the figure screamed, its serpents writhing in agony. The grimoire's pages burned, curling into ash, but the altar's mosaic surged, its serpents slithering free, their bodies solidifying into hissing creatures that lunged for her. Thomas threw Agnes aside, tackling a serpent, his knife sinking into its flesh. Agatha sprayed, burning his skin, but he fought on, shouting for Elizabeth to run. Rose crawled toward the passage, her strength fading, but the shadow nuns closed in, their claws glinting. Elizabeth slashed at the serpents, the dagger's power waning, her scar a constant agony. The figure reformed, its face now Maria's, then her mother's, a cruel mockery of her bloodline. "You destroy nothing," the figure said, its voice a chorus. "The veil is eternal. Your blood will still tear it." Elizabeth's vision blurred, her strength ebbing, but Thomas's voice reached her, raw and desperate. "You're not theirs, Elizabeth. Fight!" His words, his sacrifice, gave her clarity. She drove the dagger into the altar's heart, its blade sinking into the mosaic. A shockwave erupted, the chant fracturing, the serpents dissolving into mist. The figure screamed, its form collapsing, and the altar cracked, its glow fading. But the victory came at a cost. The sanctum trembled, its dome collapsing, stones raining down. Elizabeth grabbed Rose, pulling her toward the passage, but Thomas was trapped, a serpent's tail pinning him as shadow nuns advanced. "Go," he shouted, his eyes locking with hers, a silent plea and promise. Elizabeth's heart tore, but Rose's weight dragged her forward. She fled, the dagger dim but still hers, the sanctum's collapse burying Thomas and Agnes. The passage sealed behind her, the chant silenced, but the veil's whisper lingered, a promise of its return. Elizabeth staggered through the tunnel, Rose's limp body in her arms, the ritual dagger's wounds now cold, its power spent in the sanctum's destruction. The grimoire was ash, the altar shattered, but the cost was unbearable. Thomas, buried in the collapse, his final shout echoing in her heart. The convent's silence was a mockery, its walls no longer chanting but watching, waiting for her next move. Her serpent scar throbbed, a dull ache that confirmed the veil's survival. The Sacred Sisters' Legion was weakened, but not defeated, and Elizabeth's blood was still its key. She reached the well in trance, her strength failing as she hauled Rose up the rope, the forest's mist a shroud around them. Rose's breath was faint, her face ashen, but her eyes flickered open, filled with gratitude and fear. "You did it," she whispered. "The grimoire." "Not enough," Elizabeth said, her voice raw. "They're still out there." And Thomas, her throat closed, the memory of his sacrifice, his kiss, his vow, cutting deeper than her scar. She set Rose against a tree, her hands trembling as she checked her friend's wounds. The forest was quiet, but the tower's light burned through the fog, a reminder of the order's reach. Rose gripped her hand, her voice urgent. "Elizabeth, there's more. The order, it's not just St. Agatha's. Clara told me, before she turned. They have sisters everywhere, churches, convents, the veil's network spans the world." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Clara's betrayal had been devastating, but this was worse, a global cult, hidden beneath the church's veil, hunting her bloodline for centuries. Maria's journal, still tucked in her habit, had hinted at a larger conspiracy, but Rose's words made it real. The grimoire's destruction was a blow, but the order's roots ran deep, and the Sacred Sisters' Legion could rise again. "They'll come for you," Rose said, her voice fading. "Your blood, it's the only way to end it. You have to run." Elizabeth shook her head, her resolve hardening. I'm done running. Maria fought them. Thomas died for this. I'll find their network, expose them, destroy them. Rose's eyes widened, a mix of awe and fear. You can't do it alone. I won't, Elizabeth said, though her heart ached for Thomas. His shed, his maps, his letters, she'd return there, gather his evidence, and carry on his fight. The dagger, though dim, was hers, a weapon against the veil. Her scar, once a curse, was now a challenge, a mark of defiance. A rustle came from the trees, and Elizabeth tensed, the dagger raised. But it was Sister Helen, the older nun who'd caught her in Rose's cell, her face pale but human, her hands empty. You're alive, Helen said, her voice trembling. I didn't know. Not until tonight. Clara's gone, but others are loyal. We can help. Elizabeth's trust was battered, but Helen's fear was real. Why now? She demanded. I saw the crypt, Helen whispered. The blood, the chants. I thought it was faith, but it's evil. Let me help you get Rose out. Elizabeth hesitated, Clara's betrayal fresh, but Rose's weakening pulse forced her hand. Get her to safety, she said. I'm going back. Helen nodded, lifting Rose with surprising strength. As they vanished into the fog, Elizabeth turned toward the convent, the tower's light a beacon of her enemy. The order was global, its ritual rooted in her blood, but she wasn't their vessel, she was their hunter. Thomas's sacrifice, Maria's soul, Rose's survival, they fueled her, a fire that burned brighter than her scar. She gripped the dagger, its runes stirring faintly, as if sensing her resolve. The convent loomed, its secrets no longer hidden but exposed, waiting for her to tear them apart. The veil was eternal, but so was her fight, and she'd wage it until the sacred sister's legion was dust. The forest whispered, not with the chant but with a new sound, footsteps, human, approaching. Elizabeth spun, the dagger ready, as a figure emerged from the mist, his face blooded but alive, Thomas. The forest outside St. Agatha's convent was a shroud of mist, its trees silent witnesses to the horrors Elizabeth had faced within. She stood frozen, the ritual dagger trembling in her hand, its runes dim but stirring as Thomas emerged from the fog. His face was blooded, his groundskeeper's coat torn, but his eyes burned with the same fierce resolve that had anchored her through the sanctum's terror. The convent's tower light flickered behind him, a malevolent eye that seemed to mock their survival. Elizabeth's heart surged, Thomas was alive, against all odds, and the weight of his sacrifice in the sanctum lifted, replaced by a desperate hope. Thomas, she whispered, her voice breaking as she ran to him. He caught her, his arms strong despite his wounds, and for a moment, the forest's chill faded, drowned by the warmth of their embrace. The memory of their kiss in the sanctum, fleeting but electric, pulsed between them, a bond forged in shared loss and defiance. You're alive, she said, pulling back to study his face, her hands tracing the cuts on his cheek. I thought, the collapse. Thomas's jaw tightened, his gaze haunted. I fought my way out. The shadow nuns, Agnes, they are gone, buried. But the sanctum's power, it's not finished. I felt it, Elizabeth. It's still calling you. Her serpent scar throbbed, a dull ache that confirmed his words. The grimoire's destruction had weakened the sacred sister's legion, but Rose's revelation, that the order of the veil spanned the globe, a cult hidden within the church, meant the fight was far from over. Maria's soul, trapped in the veil, and her mother's legacy as a fugitive nun weighed on her, a bloodline curse she couldn't escape. The dagger, Maria's journal, and Thomas's evidence were her weapons, but the Order's reach was vast, and her blood was their key. "Where's Rose?" Thomas asked, his voice urgent, scanning the trees. "Safe," Elizabeth said, her breath steadying. "Sister Helen took her. She's loyal, or so she claims." But Rose said the Order's everywhere, churches, convents, cities. "We can't stay here." Thomas nodded, his hand brushing hers, a silent vow. "My shed. I've got Michael's letters, maps of other Order sites. We start there, expose them, burn their network down." Elizabeth's resolve hardened, fueled by Maria's sacrifice, Rose's survival, and Thomas's return. The convent loomed behind them, its silence a lie hiding the veil's hunger. She gripped the dagger, its runes stirring faintly, as if sensing her intent. "They hunted my family for centuries," she said, her voice fierce. "My mother, Maria, me. No more. We end this." A low hum broke the forest's quiet, not the chant but something new, a vibration from the ground, like a heartbeat waking. The tower's light flared, and shadows moved in the mist, not nuns but shapes, amorphous, their eyes glinting like the sanctum serpents. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its glow flaring, and Thomas drew his knife, his stance protective. "They are coming," he said, his voice low. "Back to the shed. Now." They ran, the forest closing around them, the hum growing louder, the shadows slithering closer. The convent's tower watched, a sentinel of the Order's eternal reach. Elizabeth's scar burned, but her heart burned brighter, for Maria, for Thomas, for a world free of the veil's shadow. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. Thomas's shed was a fortress of secrets, its ivy-covered walls a fragile barrier against the horrors stalking the forest. Elizabeth and Thomas burst inside, barring the door as the hum pulsed through the ground, a relentless echo of the sanctum's power. The oil lamp cast a warm glow over the chaos, maps pinned to the walls, letters from Michael, photographs of Father Gabriel and other Order members, a testament to Thomas's months of vigilance. Elizabeth's breath was ragged, her serpent scar throbbing, the ritual dagger's runes flickering as the shadows outside hissed, their claws scraping the boards. "We're not safe here long," Thomas said, his voice tight as he rummaged through a crate, pulling out a satchel filled with papers and a small iron cross etched with runes. "Michael's research, locations of Order cells, names, rituals. If we get this out, we can expose them." Elizabeth set the dagger on the table, its glow dim but steady, and opened Maria's journal, its pages worn but intact. Rose's map, tucked inside, marked the sanctum, but a new note in Rose's handwriting caught her eye. "The veil's anchor isn't one place. It's blood, yours, Elizabeth. Find the source." Her stomach churned. The source, what was it? Another altar, a person, a ritual? Rose's words suggested the Order's power wasn't tied to Saint Agatha's alone, but to her bloodline's curse. "What's the source?" she asked, showing Thomas the note. His face darkened, his fingers tracing a map of northern England, marked with red dots, other convents, churches, ruins. "Michael mentioned a source," he said, his voice low. "A place where the veil's power began, older than the Order." He thought it was a myth, a story to scare initiates. But if Rose knew, he pulled a letter from the satchel, Michael's handwriting frantic, "The source is real. It's where they first tore the veil. If we find it, we can end this. The shed trembled, the hum becoming a growl, the shadow's claws splintering the door. Elizabeth grabbed the dagger, its runes flaring, and Thomas shoved the satchel into her hands. "Take this," he said. "If we get separated, get to the village. There's a priest there, Father Daniel, he knew Michael might help." "I'm not leaving you," Elizabeth said, her voice fierce, the memory of his near-death in the sanctum too raw. Their eyes locked, a spark of something deeper than survival passing between them. Thomas's hand cupped her cheek, brief but electric, a promise unspoken. The door buckled, and a shadow nun's arm broke through, its claws glinting. Elizabeth slashed the dagger, its glow scattering the arm into mist, but more shadows pressed against the windows, their hisses forming words. "The marked one, the veil calls." Thomas grabbed a Molotov cocktail from a crate, lighting its rag. "Out the back," he shouted, hurling the bottle at the door. Flames erupted, the shadows shrieking, and they fled through a hidden trapdoor, emerging into the forest. The hum followed, the shadows regrouping, but the shed burned behind them, pyre of Thomas's work. Elizabeth clutched the satchel and dagger, a star of fire that fueled her resolve. The source was their next target, a chance to end the veil's curse. But the shadows were relentless, and the convent's reach was infinite. The village of Blackthorn was a cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley, its church steeple a faint silhouette against the dawn's grey veil. Elizabeth and Thomas stumbled through the forest's edge, their clothes torn, their bodies battered from the shadow nun's pursuit. The hum had faded, but Elizabeth's serpent scar pulsed, a constant reminder of the veil's hunger. The ritual dagger, its runes dim, was tucked in her habit alongside the satchel of Thomas's evidence, Michael's letters, maps, and Rose's note about the source. The convent's tower loomed in the distance, its light extinguished but its presence a weight on her soul. They reached a small church, its wooden door carved with crosses, a stark contrast to St. Agatha's Gothic menace. Thomas knocked, his breath visible in the chill, and an elderly priest, Father Daniel, 70s, kind eyes but weary, opened the door, his face paling at their state. "Thomas," he said, ushering them inside. "What's happened?" The church's interior was warm, lit by candles, its pews empty but comforting. Elizabeth collapsed onto a bench, her strength waning, the satchel heavy in her lap. Thomas explained, Michael's disappearance, the Order's rituals, the Sanctum's horrors, and a global network Rose had revealed. Daniel listened, his hands trembling as he clutched a rosary, his eyes flickering with recognition. "The Order of the Veil," Daniel whispered, his voice heavy. "I heard whispers when Michael was here. He came to me, frantic, talking of a source, a place of ancient power. I thought he was mad, until he vanished." Elizabeth pulled out Rose's note, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Rose said the source is tied to my blood. My mother was a nun at St. Agatha's, my sister Maria was sacrificed. They've hunted us for centuries." "What is it?" Daniel's face darkened, his fingers tracing the rosary. "The source is no myth. It's a relic, a fragment of the veil itself, hidden by the Order's founders. Legend says it's a stone, bled upon by the first marked one, binding the Sisters' Legion. If it exists, it's their true anchor, not the grimoire, not the altars." Elizabeth's scar burned, her mind racing. The source was the key to ending the veil's curse, but finding it meant facing the Order's global reach. She opened a satchel, spreading Michael's maps. One marked a ruin in Scotland, labelled "Possible Source" in his handwriting. "Here," she said, pointing. "We start there." Thomas's hand rested on hers, his touch grounding her. "We'll need help," he said. "Daniel, can you reach others? Priests, scholars, anyone who'll listen?" Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. "I know a few. But the Order's eyes are everywhere. You'll need to move fast." A low growl sounded outside, not animal but familiar, the veils hum, stirring again. The church's candles flickered, and shadows danced on the walls, forming serpent shapes. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, its runes flaring, and stood, her eyes meeting Thomas's. "They are here," she said, her voice fierce. "We fight, then we find the source." The church door rattled, the growl becoming a chant, and the shadows coalesced, their eyes burning. Elizabeth's scar was a fire, but her heart burned brighter, for Maria, for Thomas, for a world free of the Sacred Sisters' Legion. The final battle had begun, and she was ready to face it. The small church in Blackthorn Village trembled as the growl of the Veil's forces surged outside, a guttural chant that seeped through the wooden door like poison. Elizabeth stood in the nave, the ritual dagger's runes flaring in her hand, its glow a defiant spark against the shadows forming serpent shapes on the walls. Thomas, bloodied but unyielding, gripped his knife beside her, his satchel of evidence, Michael's letters and maps, slung over his shoulder. Father Daniel, his rosary trembling in his hands, barred the door with a pew, his face etched with fear but resolve. The candles flickered, their flames bending as if fleeing the presence that hungered for Elizabeth's marked blood. "They found us," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite the fire in her serpent scar. The Order of the Veil's global reach, revealed by Rose, meant nowhere was safe, but the source, a relic stone hidden in a Scottish ruin, was their only hope to end the ritual. Maria's journal, tucked in her habit, held her sister's warnings, and Thomas's evidence was their weapon to expose the cult. But first, they had to survive. The door buckled, splintering as shadow nuns clawed through, their decayed faces hissing, their eyes black voids. "The marked one," they chanted, their voices layered with the Veil's malice. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its runes blazing, and a wave of light scattered the nearest figures, their screams echoing like shattered glass. Thomas hurled a Molotov cocktail from his satchel, flames erupting, but the shadows reformed, relentless, their claws slashing the air. "Get to the back!" Daniel shouted, his voice cracking as he clutched a silver crucifix, its edges etched with runes. "There's a crypt below, tunnels to the village edge." Elizabeth hesitated, her eyes on Thomas, whose arm bled from a fresh wound. "We can't leave you," she said, the memory of his near-death in the Sanctum II roll. Daniel's gaze was fierce. "You must find the source, end this. I'll hold them." Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a trapdoor behind the altar. His right. "Go." The shadow nuns breached the door, their hisses drowning the chant. Daniel raised the crucifix, chanting in Latin, and a faint glow pulsed, slowing the shadows. Elizabeth and Thomas dove through the trapdoor, landing in a damp crypt, its walls lined with ancient tombs. The door slammed shut above, muffling Daniel's cries as the shadows overwhelmed him. Elizabeth's heart tore, but Thomas's hand steadied her, his eyes fierce. "He gave us time. We use it." The crypt's tunnel was narrow, its air thick with mildew and despair. The dagger's glow lit their path, but the chant followed, seeping through the stone, urging Elizabeth to surrender. Her scar burned, a constant pull toward the veil, but Thomas's presence, his touch, his vow, kept her grounded. They ran, the satchel bouncing against Thomas's side, the journal heavy in her habit. The source was their target, but the Order's forces were relentless, and Blackthorn was no longer a haven. A low growl echoed ahead, not from above but within the tunnel. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its runes flaring, as a shadow coalesced, not a nun, but a serpent, its eyes glowing green, its hiss a voice. "You cannot flee the veil," Thomas slashed with his knife, but the serpent dissolved, reforming behind them. They sprinted, the tunnel sloping upward, until they burst into a graveyard at the village's edge, dawn's grey light a frail shield against the darkness. The growl faded, but the chant lingered, a promise of pursuit. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, her resolve burning brighter than her scar. "To Scotland," she said, her voice fierce. "We find the source, or we die trying." Thomas nodded, his hand brushing hers, a silent promise. The graveyard's crosses loomed, their shadows twisting like serpents, as they fled into the dawn, the Order's eyes everywhere. The road to Scotland was a ribbon of mist and menace, winding through desolate moors where the wind howled like the veil's chant. Elizabeth and Thomas travelled on foot, their stolen cloaks barely shielding them from the chill. The ritual dagger, its runes dim but stirring, was hidden in Elizabeth's habit alongside Maria's journal, while Thomas carried the satchel, Michael's maps marking a ruin near Inverness as the possible source, the relic stone that anchored the Sacred Sisters' Legion. Elizabeth's serpent scar throbbed, a constant reminder of her bloodline's curse, her mother's flight, Maria's sacrifice, and her own role as the marked vessel. They moved in silence, their breaths visible, their eyes scanning the moors for the Order's shadows. Father Daniel's sacrifice in Blackthorn weighed on Elizabeth, a debt she vowed to repay by ending the veil's ritual. Thomas's presence was her anchor, his quiet strength a contrast to the chaos within her. Their kiss in the sanctum, his survival, had deepened their bond, but fear for his safety gnawed at her. The Order's global network meant no one was safe, and her blood was their prize. "We need a plan," Thomas said, his voice low as they rested by a crumbling stone wall, the moors stretching endless around them. He spread Michael's map, its red dots marking Order sites across Europe. "The ruins a day's walk, but the Order's watching. They'll know we're coming." Elizabeth opened the journal, her fingers tracing Maria's final entry. "The veil's power is blood, but its weakness is will. The marked one can tear it, or seal it." Her scar burned, and she met Thomas's gaze. "If the source is the veil's anchor, my blood might destroy it. But what if it needs more? What if it needs me?" Thomas's jaw tightened, his hand covering hers. "You're not theirs, Elizabeth. We'll find another way." Maria fought without giving in. "So will you." His words stirred hope, but doubt lingered. Rose's warning, "The source is blood, yours," suggested a sacrifice she wasn't ready to face. She pulled out the journal's loose pages, finding a sketch of a stone carved with a serpent swallowing a star, labeled, "The Source," in Maria's hand. "This is it," she said. "If we destroy it, the veil collapses." A rustle broke the silence, not wind but deliberate. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its runes flaring, as shadows moved in the mist, human, not serpents, but their eyes glinted unnaturally. Order initiates, cloaked in black, daggers drawn, fanned out across the moor. Their leader, a woman with a veiled face, spoke, her voice led with the chant, "The marked one cannot flee. The veil claims its own." Thomas stood, his knife ready, shielding Elizabeth. "Stay behind me," he said, but she stepped beside him, the dagger blazing. "We fight," she said, her voice fierce. The initiates charged, their daggers clashing with hers, the runes scattering sparks. Thomas fought, his knife slashing, but the initiates were relentless, their movements eerily synchronized. Elizabeth's scar burned, the chant urging surrender, but she fought on, her will a fire that burned brighter than the veil's call. The battle was brutal, blood staining the moor, but the dagger's power gave them an edge. The leader fell, her veil revealing a face marked with a serpent scar like Elizabeth's, a chilling mirror. The initiates retreated, their hisses fading, but the chant lingered, a promise of return. Elizabeth and Thomas stood, battered but alive, their bond sealed in blood and defiance. "To the ruin," Elizabeth said, her voice resolute. The source waited, and with it, the chance to end her curse, or become its final victim. The Scottish ruin was a skeleton of stone, its walls crumbling under centuries of rain and neglect, perched on a cliff overlooking a churning sea. Elizabeth and Thomas reached it at dusk, their bodies exhausted but their resolve unbroken. The ritual dagger's runes flickered in Elizabeth's hand, its glow a faint guide through the ruin's labyrinth of arches and collapsed chambers. The satchel, Michael's maps and letters, was heavy on Thomas's shoulder, while Maria's journal, with its sketch of the source stone, was Elizabeth's map to salvation or doom. Her serpent scar pulsed, a fire that grew with each step, as if the veil knew she was close to its heart. The ruin was silent, its air heavy with the scent of salt and decay. The chant was faint, a whisper in the wind, but Elizabeth felt it in her bones, urging her to kneel, to offer her blood. The battle on the moor had shaken her, the initiate's serpent scar, a mirror of her own, suggested others shared her curse, victims or allies she'd never known. Thomas's presence, his steady hand brushing hers, kept her grounded, but fear for him grew. The Order's initiates were relentless, and the source was their endgame. Michael's map marked a chamber beneath the ruin, accessible through a hidden stair. They found it behind a collapsed altar, its stones carved with serpents swallowing stars, echoing the journal's sketch. The stair descended into darkness, its walls slick with moisture, the air thick with a pulse that wasn't sound but feeling. Elizabeth led, the dagger's glow lighting their path, her scar a beacon to the source. The chamber was a crypt, its center dominated by a stone slab, the source, a massive block of obsidian carved with a serpent swallowing a star, its surface stained with blood. The air shimmered, as if the veil itself hung before it, and the chant surged, a chorus of voices, Maria's, her mother's, countless others, calling her name. Elizabeth's scar burned, her vision blurring, and the dagger's runes flared, struggling against the source's power. "Elizabeth," a voice whispered, not from the stone but within her mind. She staggered, the chamber fading, replaced by a vision, a desolate plain, a sky of green fire, and a legion of figures, women, their faces hers, Maria's, her mother's, their scars bleeding into a sea of serpents. The sacred sister stood at their center, not one but many, her voice a roar, "Your blood binds us. Tear the veil, or seal it forever." Elizabeth screamed, the vision shattering as Thomas caught her, his arms strong, his voice urgent. "Stay with me. It's not real." But it was real, the source's power, the bloodline's curse, the sister's legion. Her scar bled, a thin trickle staining her wrist, and the source's serpent glowed, drinking it. Thomas pulled her back, his knife raised, but the chamber trembled, shadows coalescing into serpents, their hisses joining the chant. The vision's words, tear or seal, echoed, a choice she couldn't unhear. Destroy the source, or become its vessel. Elizabeth raised the dagger, its runes blazing, her eyes meeting Thomas's. "We end this," she said, her voice fierce, but her heart trembled. The source waited, and with it, her fate, and the world's. The source chamber beneath the Scottish ruin was a crypt of primal terror, its obsidian slab, the veil's anchor, pulsing with a green glow that seemed to breathe. Elizabeth stood before it, the ritual dagger's runes blazing in her hand, their light a frail shield against the serpents slithering from the walls, their hisses merging with the chant of the Order of the Veil. Her serpent scar bled, a thin stream trickling onto the stone, its surface drinking her blood like a parched mouth. Thomas, his knife drawn, stood at her side, his face blooded from their battles, his eyes fierce with a vow to protect her. The vision of the sacred sister, a legion of souls, her ancestors, Maria, still burned in her mind, its ultimatum clear, tear the veil or seal it with her blood. The chamber trembled, the serpent's eyes glowing like embers, their bodies solidifying into writhing masses that lunged for her. Elizabeth slashed the dagger, its runes flaring, and the serpent dissolved, its ichor burning the floor. But more came, their hisses forming words. The marked one, feed the veil, a scar seared, a fire that pulled her toward the source, urging her to surrender. Maria's journal, tucked in her habit, held her sister's warning. The marked one's will is the veil's weakness, but the source's hunger was overwhelming, a void that threatened to consume her. Thomas fought beside her, his knife slashing, his arm bleeding from a serpent's bite. "We have to destroy it," he shouted, dodging a tail that cracked the stone. He grabbed a loose rock, aiming for the source, but a serpent coiled around his leg, dragging him down. Elizabeth screamed, swinging the dagger, its glow scattering the serpent, but the chamber's walls pulsed, the chant becoming a roar that drowned her thoughts. The source's serpent carving glowed brighter, its star-shaped mouth opening, a vortex of green light that pulled at her blood. Her scar bled faster, and the vision returned, unbidden, the desolate plain, the legion of women, Maria, her mother, herself, bleeding into a sea of serpents. The sister's voice roared, "Your blood is ours. Tear the veil, or all is lost." Elizabeth staggered, her knees buckling, but Thomas's hand caught hers, his touch grounding her against the abyss. "Elizabeth, fight it," he said, his voice raw. "You're not theirs." She clung to his words, her heart a fortress against the source's pull. The dagger's runes flared, its warmth surging through her, and she raised it, aiming for the source's heart. But footsteps echoed from the stair, slow and deliberate. Elizabeth spun, expecting order initiates, but it was Sister Clara, her habit pristine, her face serene, her eyes glowing with the veil's green light. The betrayer who'd lured her into the sanctum stood before her, a dagger in her hand, its runes mirroring Elizabeth's. "You can't destroy the source," Clara said, her voice layered with the chant. "Your blood is its power, Elizabeth. Join us, or they all die." Thomas lunged, his knife aimed at Clara, but she sidestepped, unnaturally fast, her dagger slashing his chest. He fell, blood pooling, and Elizabeth screamed, the dagger's glow blazing as she charged. Clara parried, their blades clashing, sparks scattering. The serpents circled, their hisses urging Elizabeth to kneel, but her rage, for Maria, for Thomas, for her cursed bloodline, burned brighter than her scar. "You took my sister!" Elizabeth snarled, her blade forcing Clara back. "You won't take me." Clara's smile was cold. "You're already ours. The source knows your blood." The chamber shook, the source's vortex widening, pulling at Elizabeth's will. She fought, her dagger a beacon, but Clara's words and the serpent's hisses were a tide she could barely resist. Thomas stirred, his hand reaching for her, and she knew she had to act, destroy the source, or become its vessel. The source chamber was a maelstrom of horror, its obsidian slab a gaping maw that drank Elizabeth's blood, its green vortex swirling with the veil's hunger. The ritual dagger's runes blazed in her hand, their glow dimming as the serpent slithered closer, their hissing chant a relentless pull on her serpent scar. Clara stood before her, her mirrored dagger clashing with Elizabeth's, her serene malice a stark contrast to the chaos. Thomas lay bleeding on the floor, his knife lost, his eyes fixed on Elizabeth with a desperate plea, "Fight, survive." The source's power was overwhelming, its vortex a void that promised eternity if she surrendered her marked blood to the sacred Sisters' Legion. Elizabeth's scar bled freely, staining her habit, each drop feeding the source's glow. Clara's blade slashed, grazing her arm, and the pain sharpened her focus. "You can't win," Clara said, her voice a chorus with the chant. "Your bloodline was chosen before your birth. Maria's soul, your mother's, they are part of the sister now. Join them." The words cut deeper than Clara's dagger, but Elizabeth's rage, for Maria's sacrifice, Thomas's wounds, her mother's lost life, ignited a fire within her. She parried Clara's strike, the ritual dagger's runes flaring, and drove her back, their blades locked in a shower of sparks. The serpents lunged, their fangs glinting, but Elizabeth dodged, her movements fueled by a will Maria's journal had promised, the marked one's wool is the veil's weakness. "Elizabeth," Thomas rasped, crawling toward his knife, blood trailing behind him. His voice was her anchor, a reminder of their kiss, their vow to fight together. She glanced at him, her heart tearing, and saw the source's vortex widen, its pull now physical, dragging her closer. Her blood dripped onto the stone, and the serpent's star-shaped mouth glowed, portal to the veil's heart. Clara laughed, her eyes glowing. "You feel it, don't you? The sisters call." One drop more, and the veil tears open. Elizabeth's vision blurred, the vision returning, the legion of women, their faces hers, bleeding into a sea of serpents. But Maria's voice, faint but clear, broke through, "Seal it, Liz. Your will, not your blood." The journal's words echoed, a truth she'd overlooked. The source didn't need her death, it needed her surrender. She could seal the veil, not tear it, but at a cost. She fainted, drawing Clara's strike, then kicked her back, the dagger's glow blazing. She ran to the source, her blood soaking the stone, and raised the dagger, its blade aimed at the serpent's star. "This ends now," she said, her voice fierce, but the vortex pulled harder, a scar of fire that threatened to consume her. Thomas staggered to his feet, tackling Clara as she charged, their bodies crashing to the floor. The serpents surged, their fangs sinking into his arm, but he fought, shouting, "Do it, Elizabeth!" She plunged the dagger into the source, its blade sinking into the star. A shockwave erupted, the chamber shaking, the serpents screaming as they dissolved. The vortex collapsed, the chant fracturing, but Elizabeth's scar bled faster, her strength ebbing. The source cracked, its glow fading, but a voice, not the sisters, but Maria's, whispered, "Your blood seals it, but the price is high." Elizabeth fell to her knees, her vision darkening, the dagger slipping from her hand. Thomas crawled to her, his blood mixing with hers, his arms pulling her close. The chamber stilled, the source dim, but Clara's laughter echoed, her body gone, her voice a promise, the veil endures. You've only delayed us. Elizabeth clung to Thomas, her heart breaking. The source was sealed, but at what cost? Her blood had bought time, but the order was eternal, and the fight wasn't over. The source chamber was a tomb of silence, its obsidian slab cracked, its serpent star dim, the veil's vortex sealed by Elizabeth's blood. She knelt beside Thomas, his arms around her, their blood pooling on the stone, a testament to their sacrifice. The ritual dagger lay beside her, its runes cold, its power spent in the source's destruction. Her serpent scar throbbed, a dull ache that confirmed the veil's survival, weakened, but not vanquished. Maria's journal, stained with her blood, held the truth of her will, but Clara's final words, "The veil endures," were a chilling promise. The order of the veil was global, and the Sacred Sisters' Legion waited, biding its time. Thomas's breath was shallow, his wounds severe, but his eyes burned with defiance. "You did it," he whispered, his hand cupping her face. "The source, it's gone." Elizabeth shook her head, tears streaking her blooded cheeks. "Not gone. Sealed. And they are still out there." Her vision of the Legion, Maria, her mother, countless marked women, haunted her, a bloodline curse she couldn't escape. The journal's sketch, the satchel's maps, Rose's warnings, all pointed to a larger war, one she wasn't sure she could win. A slow clap echoed through the chamber, sharp and mocking. Elizabeth tensed, grabbing the dagger, its runes stirring faintly, as a figure emerged from the shadows, not Clara, not Agnes, but Sister Rose, her face serene, her habit pristine, her eyes glowing with a green light that matched the source's. Elizabeth's heart stopped. Rose, her friend, her ally, stood before her, alive and untouched, but wrong, her presence a blade that cut deeper than any serpent's fang. "Rose," Elizabeth whispered, staggering to her feet, Thomas leaning on her, his knife raised. "You, alive?" Rose's smile was cold, her voice layered with the chant, not weak but commanding. "Alive, yes. And more. You've done well, Elizabeth, sealing the source. But the veil is eternal, and I am its true servant." Thomas's grip tightened, his voice raw. "You were with them? All along?" Rose tilted her head, her eyes glinting. "Mother Agnes, Father Gabriel, Clara, they were tools, pawns in a larger design. I am the Order's heart, the Sister's voice. Your bloodline, Elizabeth, was my lure, crafted over centuries to bring you here." Elizabeth's mind reeled, Rose's betrayal wound deeper than Clara's. The notes, the map, Rose's screams in the sanctum, had they all been lies, performance to draw her to the source? Maria's journal had warned of deception, but Elizabeth had trusted Rose, her fear, her pain. "Why?" she demanded, the dagger trembling in her hand. "Why me?" Rose stepped closer, her voice a caress. "Your blood is unique, Elizabeth. Not just marked, but chosen by the Sister herself. Sealing the source was your test, proving your will. Now, you'll tear the veil, willingly or not." The chamber trembled, the cracked source stirring, its serpent star glowing faintly. Shadows coalesced behind Rose, not nuns but figures, women, their faces Elizabeth's, Maria's, her mother's, their scars bleeding. The Legion was here, bound to Rose's will. Thomas pulled Elizabeth back, his knife ready, but his strength was fading, his blood a stark contrast to Rose's untouched form. "You can't have her," Thomas said, his voice fierce despite his pain. "She's stronger than you." Rose's laugh was a blade, her eyes burning. "Strength is fleeting. The veil is forever. Join us, Elizabeth, or watch him die." Elizabeth's scar burned, the dagger's wounds flaring, her heart torn between rage and despair. Rose was the mastermind, the Order's true leader, manipulating her from the start. The source was sealed, but the Veil's legion was waking, and Rose's power was absolute. Elizabeth gripped the dagger, her eyes meeting Thomas's, a silent vow, they'd fight, together, no matter the cost. The chamber's shadows closed in, and the final battle loomed, a war for her soul and the world's. The source chamber in the Scottish ruin was a crucible of despair, its cracked obsidian slab pulsing faintly, a wounded heart still beating with the Veil's hunger. Elizabeth stood defiant, the ritual dagger's runes blazing in her hand, its glow a fragile shield against the shadows coalescing around Sister Rose, the Order of the Veil's true mastermind. Rose's serene smile masked a power older than the convent, her eyes glowing green with the Sacred Sisters Legion, a collective of souls, including Maria and Elizabeth's ancestors, bound to her will. Thomas, bloodied and weakening, leaned against Elizabeth, his knife raised, his gaze fierce despite the serpents slithering from the walls, their hisses chanting her name, the marked one, tear the veil. Elizabeth's serpent scar bled, a searing fire that pulled her toward the source, its star-shaped mouth stirring as Rose raised her hands, her voice a chorus with the Legion. "You've sealed the source, Elizabeth," she said, her tone mocking, "but the veil is eternal. Your bloodline was mine from the start, your mother's flight, Maria's sacrifice, your defiance. All led you here, to me." Elizabeth's heart tore, Rose's betrayal wound deeper than any blade. Maria's journal, stained with her blood, had warned of deception, but Rose's performance, her fear, her screams, had been a masterstroke, luring Elizabeth to this moment. "You used me," she said, her voice raw. "Maria trusted you." Rose's laugh was cold, her eyes burning. Maria was a pawn, her soul a spark to wake the sister. "You are the flame, Elizabeth. Your blood will tear the veil, and the Legion will rise." The chamber shook, the serpents solidifying, their fangs glinting as they lunged. Elizabeth swung the dagger, its runes flaring, scattering a serpent into ichor, but more came, their hisses drowning her thoughts. Thomas fought beside her, his knife slashing, but his wounds slowed him, blood pooling at his feet. The Legion's shadows took form, women, their faces Elizabeth's, Maria's, her mother's, their scars bleeding, their eyes pleading and accusing. "Join us," the Legion whispered, their voices a tide pulling at her will. Her scar burned, her blood dripping onto the source, its glow intensifying. The dagger's power wavered, its runes dimming, and Elizabeth staggered, the Legion's weight crushing her soul. Thomas's hand gripped hers, his touch a lifeline, his voice raw, "You're stronger than them, Elizabeth. Fight!" Rose gestured, and the Legion surged, their shadows wrapping around Thomas, dragging him toward the source. Elizabeth screamed, slashing the dagger, its glow flaring, but the Legion was relentless, their faces shifting, Maria's eyes, her mother's smile, each a dagger to her heart. Rose stepped closer, her dagger raised, its runes mirroring Elizabeth's. "Kneel, or he dies," she said, her voice a command. Elizabeth's vision blurred, the source's vortex stirring, a portal to the Veil's heart. She couldn't lose Thomas, not after Maria, not after everything. Her scar bled faster, the legion's chant roaring, but Maria's words from the journal echoed, "Your will, not your blood." She raised the dagger, not to strike Rose but to defy her, her voice fierce, "I'm not yours." The chamber erupted, the source's glow blinding, the legion screaming as Elizabeth's will pushed back the veil's hunger. But Rose's smile didn't falter, her dagger aimed at Thomas's heart, and Elizabeth knew the fight was far from over. The source chamber was a battlefield of light and shadow, the ritual dagger's runes blazing in Elizabeth's hand as she faced Rose, the Order's mastermind, whose green eyes burned with the sacred Sisters' Legion. The cracked source stone pulsed, its star-shaped mouth drinking Elizabeth's blood, a vortex of green light threatening to tear the veil. Thomas, bound by the Legion's shadows, struggled against their grip, his knife lost, his blood staining the floor. The serpents circled, their hisses a chant that urged Elizabeth to surrender her marked blood, her scar a fire that pulled her toward oblivion. But her will, fueled by Maria's memory, Thomas's love, and her mother's defiance, burned brighter. Rose's dagger hovered over Thomas's heart, her voice a venomous caress. "One choice, Elizabeth," she said. "Your blood, freely given, or his life." The veil waits. Elizabeth's heart tore, the Legion's faces, Maria's, her mother's, pleading for her to join them. The journal's truth, the marked one's will is the veil's weakness, was her only weapon, but the source's power was overwhelming, its vortex a void that promised eternity. She glanced at Thomas, his eyes fierce despite his pain, and saw the man who'd fought for her, kissed her, vowed to end this together. Losing him was unthinkable, but surrendering to the veil meant losing everything. "Elizabeth," Thomas rasped, his voice breaking through the chant. "Don't do it. You're enough." His words ignited her resolve, a fire that drowned the Legion's pull. She lunged, not at Rose but at the source, driving the dagger into its star-shaped mouth. The blade sank deep, its runes exploding in a burst of light. The chamber shook, the serpents screaming as they dissolved, the Legion's shadows fracturing. The vortex collapsed, the source's glow fading, but Elizabeth's scar bled faster, her blood soaking the stone, a price she hadn't foreseen. Rose screamed, her dagger slashing, but the dagger's light repelled her, her form flickering. "You can't stop us," she roared, her eyes blazing. "The veil is eternal." Elizabeth fell to her knees, her strength ebbing, the dagger slipping from her hand. The source cracked further, its power draining, but her voice, not Rose's, but Maria's, whispered, "Your blood seals it, Liz." But the cost, the chamber stilled, the Legion's shadows retreating, but Thomas collapsed, his wounds too severe, his breath shallow. Elizabeth crawled to him, tears streaming, her hands pressing against his chest, blood mixing with hers. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice raw. The dagger lay beside her, its runes cold, its power spent. Rose staggered, her form fading, her voice a hiss, "You've delayed us, Elizabeth. The Order lives." The chamber trembled, stones falling, the ruin threatening to collapse. Elizabeth lifted Thomas, her strength fueled by desperation, and dragged him toward the stair, the source dim behind her. The Legion's chant faded, but Rose's words lingered, a global cult, waiting to strike again. Elizabeth's scar throbbed, her blood the veil's key, but her will had sealed it, at least for now. Thomas's weight was heavy, his life fading, and she knew the cost of her choice was more than blood. They reached the surface, the ruins' arches silhouetted against a blood-red dawn. Elizabeth collapsed, Thomas in her arms, her heart breaking as his breath stilled. The source was sealed, but the price was unbearable. Thomas, her anchor, was gone. The Scottish ruin stood silent under a dawn stained with blood, its crumbling arches a testament to Elizabeth's battle against the veil. She knelt beside Thomas's lifeless body, her hands stained with his blood, a serpent scar a dull ache that mirrored the void in her heart. The ritual dagger lay cold beside her, its runes extinguished, its power drained in sealing the source. Maria's journal, soaked with her tears, held the truth of her victory. Her will had defied the sacred Sisters' Legion, but Rosie's final words haunted her: the Order lives. The global cult, hidden in churches and convents, was still out there, and Elizabeth's blood was their eternal target. A rustle broke the silence, not serpents but footsteps, human, deliberate. Elizabeth grabbed the dagger, its blade heavy but hers, and stood, her grief fueling her rage. Figures emerged from the mist, Order initiates, cloaked in black, their daggers glinting, their faces marked with serpent scars like hers. At their head stood Sister Helen, the nun who'd helped Rose escape, her face no longer fearful but cold, her eyes glowing with the veil's light. Another betrayal, deeper than Clara's, sharper than Rose's. "You survived," Helen said, her voice a chant's echo. "Rose underestimated you, but the Order never will. Your blood is ours, Elizabeth." Elizabeth's heart hardened, Thomas's death a fire that burned through her despair. "You'll have to kill me first," she said, raising the dagger, its runes stirring faintly, as if her will alone revived it. The initiates charged, their daggers clashing with hers, sparks scattering in the dawn. Elizabeth fought, her movements precise, fueled by Maria's sacrifice, Thomas's love, her mother's defiance. The dagger's glow flared, scattering an initiate's blade, its power a reflection of her resolve. Helen watched, her smile thin, her hands weaving a chant that woke the ruin's shadows, serpents, their eyes green, slithering from the stones. Elizabeth dodged a fang, slashing the dagger, its light dissolving a serpent. The initiates pressed closer, their scars bleeding, a mirror of her own. She fought, her body aching, her blood staining the ground, but each strike was for Thomas, for Maria, for a world free of the veil. The satchel, Michael's evidence, lay beside Thomas's body, a beacon of her mission to expose the Order. Helen raised her dagger, its runes blazing, and lunged, her voice a roar: "The veil will rise." Elizabeth parried, their blades locked, the dagger's glow surging. She twisted, driving her blade into Helen's chest, the nun's eyes widening as her glow faded. The initiates faltered, their serpents dissolving, and Elizabeth stood, blooded but unbroken, the dagger trembling in her hand. The ruin stilled, the initiates' bodies scattered, the chant silenced. Elizabeth retrieved the satchel, her eyes on Thomas, a heart a wound that would never heal. The Order's last stand had fallen, but Rose's warning, its global reach, meant the war wasn't over. She knelt by Thomas, kissing his forehead, a final vow: "I'll finish this." The dawn brightened, but the ruin's shadows lingered, a reminder of the veil's eternal hunger. Elizabeth stood, the dagger and satchel hers, ready to hunt the Order's remnants, wherever they hid. Elizabeth walked away from the Scottish ruin, the satchel heavy with Michael's evidence, maps, letters, names of Order cells across the globe. The ritual dagger, its runes faint but alive, was tucked in her habit, alongside Maria's journal, its pages a testament to her sister's fight. Her serpent scar throbbed, a reminder of her bloodline's curse, but her will, forged by Maria's sacrifice, Thomas's love, her mother's defiance, was stronger. The Order of the Veil was wounded, its source sealed, its leaders, Rose, Agnes, Clara, Helen, fallen, but its global network endured, the cancer hidden in the Church's heart. Elizabeth was no longer a nun but a hunter, her mission to expose and destroy the cult before it could claim her blood again. She reached a coastal village, its harbor alive with fishing boats, a world untouched by the Veil's shadow. A small church stood at its edge, its priest, Father James, 50s, gentle but wary, offering her shelter. She shared Michael's evidence, her voice steady despite her grief, and James's face paled, his hands trembling as he read the names, bishops, nuns, scholars, all tied to the order. This is bigger than I imagined, he said, his rosary glinting in the candlelight. The Church must know. Elizabeth nodded, but her trust was battered. The order's in the Church, Father. We need allies outside, journalists, governments, anyone who'll listen. James agreed, promising to contact a network of reformist priests, men and women who'd long suspected corruption. Elizabeth left him with copies of the evidence, keeping the originals, her mission too urgent for delay. The journal's final entry, the marked one concealed the veil, but only through wool, was her guide, but Rose's warning, the veil is eternal, was a truth she couldn't ignore. Her blood was the key, and the order would hunt her until it was theirs. She traveled south, blending into cities, her habit traded for civilian clothes, the dagger hidden but ever present. Each night, she studied the satchel's maps, marking order sites, Rome, Paris, New York, planning her next strike. Thomas's face haunted her, his kiss a memory that fueled her fight. Maria's soul, trapped in the veil, was her burden, a debt she'd pay by ending the Legion's threat. A news report caught her eye, a fire in a London church, whispers of a cult uncovered. The order was moving, covering its tracks, but Elizabeth was faster. She sent Michael's evidence to a journalist, her anonymity a shield, and waited, her scar a constant ache. The world was waking to the veil's shadow, but the order's reach was deep, and her blood was their prize. A low hum stirred in her dreams, not the chant but a whisper, Maria's voice, faint but clear, "Keep fighting, Liz." Elizabeth woke, the dagger warm in her hand, its runes stirring. The war was hers, and she'd wage it alone, a marked woman against an eternal foe. Months later, Elizabeth stood on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, the wind carrying the scent of salt and freedom. The satchel was lighter now, its evidence shared with the world, news reports exposing the Order of the Veil, arrests of bishops and nuns, churches searched for serpent symbols. The cult was fracturing, its global network unraveling under scrutiny, but Elizabeth knew it wasn't gone. Her serpent scar, now a faint line, throbbed faintly, a reminder that the veil endured, its hunger biding its time. The ritual dagger, its runes dormant, was her constant companion, a weapon for the battles ahead. She opened Maria's journal, its final page a letter to her, "Liz, if I fail, you'll carry the fight. Your will is stronger than our blood. I love you." Tears fell, but Elizabeth's heart was steady, forged by loss, Maria, Thomas, her mother, and triumph. The source was sealed, the grimoire ash, the sanctum buried, but the order's remnants lurked, and her blood was their eternal target. She'd exposed them, but the war wasn't over. A small church in Ireland was her next stop, its priest a name from Michael's letters, potential ally or enemy. Elizabeth traveled light, her identity fluid, her mission clear, find the order's last cells, destroy their altars, free the souls trapped in the veil. Maria's presence lingered, not a ghost but a spark in her heart, guiding her. Thomas's memory, his kiss, his sacrifice, was a fire that burned brighter than her scar, a vow to live, to fight. She walked the cliff's edge, the sea churning below, and paused, sensing a hum, not the chant, but a whisper, faint and new. Her scar stirred, and she gripped the dagger, its runes flickering. The wind carried a shape, serpent-like, fleeting, dissolving into mist. Elizabeth's breath caught, her eyes narrowing. The veil was watching, waiting, its legion weakened but eternal. In a distant city, a cathedral's crypt held a secret meeting. A woman, her face shadowed, traced a serpent symbol on a stone, her scar glinting in candlelight. "The marked one lives," she whispered, her voice a chant's echo. "Her blood will tear the veil." Elizabeth turned from the cliff, the dagger warm in her hand, her resolve unbreakable. The order was out there, and so was she, a hunter, a survivor, a sister. The war was eternal, but so was her will, and she'd fight until the sacred sister's legion was dust. The sea roared, and she walked on, the serpent's echo a challenge she was ready to meet. The Atlantic roared beneath the cliffs of Cornwall, its waves a relentless hymn that echoed the battles Elizabeth had fought. She stood at the edge, her cloak snapping in the wind, her serpent scar a faint throb beneath her sleeve, a scar that no longer burned but whispered, a reminder of the veil's eternal hunger. The ritual dagger, its runes dormant but warm, was tucked at her waist, a silent partner in her war against the Order of the Veil. Maria's journal, its pages worn and blood-stained, rested in her satchel alongside Thomas's evidence, maps, letters, names, that had sparked a global reckoning. The Order's network was crumbling, exposed by journalists and reformist priests, but its roots ran deep, and Elizabeth knew the Sacred Sisters' Legion was only wounded, not dead. Months had passed since the Scottish ruin, where she'd sealed the source stone and lost Thomas, his sacrifice a wound that bled with every breath. Maria's soul, trapped in the veil, was her guiding light, her sister's final words, "Your will is stronger than our blood," a mantra that kept her moving. Her mother's legacy, a fugitive nun hunted by the Order, was her burden, a bloodline curse she'd turned into a weapon. Elizabeth was no longer Sister Elizabeth, the grieving nun who'd arrived at St. Agatha's convent. She was a hunter, a shadow, a marked woman waging a solitary war against an ancient evil. She'd tracked Order cells across Europe, Rome's hidden crypts, Paris's forgotten chapels, each victory a spark in the darkness. The dagger had cut through altars, its runes flaring with her will, and the journal's clues had led her to allies, priests like Father James, journalists hungry for truth, survivors bearing scars like hers. But the Order's remnants were cunning, their serpent symbols carved in places she'd never expected, cathedrals, orphanages, even secular halls of power. Rose's betrayal, a revelation as the Order's mastermind, had taught Elizabeth to trust sparingly, to see every ally as a potential Clara, a potential Helen. The cliff's wind carried a hum, faint but familiar, not the chant of St. Agatha's but a whisper, a voice that wasn't Maria's or Thomas's but older, colder. Elizabeth's scar stirred, and she gripped the dagger, its runes flickering like a heartbeat. The sea churned, its foam forming shapes, serpents, fleeting, dissolving into spray. She scanned the horizon, her eyes narrowing, her heart steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. The veil was watching, its legion biding its time, waiting for her blood to tear its final scene. She opened the journal, its final page a letter from Maria. "Liz, if I fail, you'll carry the fight. I love you." Tears fell, but Elizabeth's resolve was iron, forged in loss and triumph. Thomas's kiss, his vow to fight together, was a fire that burned brighter than her scar, a promise to live, to fight, for a world free of the veil's shadow. The satchel held a new map, stolen from an Order safe house in Dublin, marking a site in Iceland, a volcanic cave rumored to hold a second source, a failsafe for the veil's ritual. It was her next target, a step closer to freeing Maria's soul and ending her bloodline's curse. A rustle came from the cliff path, not the wind but footsteps, soft, deliberate. Elizabeth spun, the dagger drawn, its runes flaring. A figure emerged from the mist, a woman, young, her face pale, her wrist marked with a serpent scar. Not an initiate, not a nun, but a stranger, her eyes wide with fear and recognition. "You're her," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "The marked one. They're hunting me, too." Elizabeth lowered the dagger, her heart racing. Another marked woman, a sister in curse if not in blood. The Order's reach was vast, but so was its legacy of victims. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "Anna," the woman said, a scar glinting in the fading light. "They took my sister, like yours. I found your name in a letter, from a priest. You're fighting them." Elizabeth's trust was battered, but Anna's fear was real, a scar a mirror of her own. The journal's warnings, Thomas's maps, her own battles, they weren't just hers but a shared burden. "Come with me," she said, her decision swift. "We're stronger together." Anna nodded, tears falling, and Elizabeth felt a spark of hope, a new ally, a new fight. The dagger's runes pulsed, as if sensing her resolve, and the hum faded, the sea serpents dissolving. The veil was eternal, but so was her will, a fire that would burn through the Order's shadows. Far across the ocean, in a New York cathedral's crypt, a cloaked figure knelt before a stone altar, its surface carved with a serpent swallowing a star. A woman's voice, soft but commanding, echoed, "The marked one lives. Her blood will tear the veil." A new scar bled on her wrist, and the altar glowed, a whisper rising from the stone. Elizabeth turned from the cliff, Anna at her side, the dagger warm in her hand. The war was hers, theirs, a battle for souls, Maria's, Thomas's, Anna's, her own. She walked into the mist, the serpent's whisper a challenge she'd meet with fire, her will a blade sharper than any dagger. The world was waking, and the veil would tremble.